Good morning, good evening, whatever time of day it is for you. Welcome to this thing that I do called Thor's Entertainment. I am Thor, and today I'm combining all of my playthrough videos for Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. This way we have one continuous, uninterrupted playthrough video. This is a game that I grew up playing and it brought me a lot of entertainment back in the day, back when it was originally released in 1999 on the PlayStation. So I was really happy whenever it got a remaster that was released back in December 2024. I was really looking forward to that release for a long time, and I was eager to play through the game again for the first time in about 20 years. When it was all done, I definitely was not disappointed. I had a great time. Now, I have already released some Soul Reaver videos in preparation for the playthrough. Those cover the locations of optional items like glyphs, health artifacts, and mana artifacts. Since I want to be focusing mostly on the main story elements in this playthrough, you likely won't see me getting those optional items outside of those specific videos. Although I will go ahead and add links to those videos in the description, just in case anyone needs to know where to find those items. It is worth mentioning that Soul Reaver is actually the second game in the Legacy of Kain series. The first game in the series was actually Blood Omen. Even though this is a sequel, it is quite different from the previous game. Even the very few returning characters and locations, they are barely in this game, so I don't think you really need to be worried about being confused over missing details. I think the story of Soul Reaver stands on its own just fine without having any prior knowledge. And I'm also saying that as a person who played Soul Reaver long before he played Blood Omen. And even back then I was still able to follow the plot, so I believe you can too. But if you did play Blood Omen, I think it enhances a few references, but it is not required at all to follow the story of Soul Reaver. Which that story is mostly going to be a pretty straightforward tale of revenge. Just throw in some vampires, some vengeful spirits, and the late great voice of Tony J, and we have ourselves a game. Alright, no more build-up is needed. Let's go ahead and jump into the opening cinematic and get the story started. Although the music is going to be missing from that cutscene because it was causing some copyright issues. So I just removed that, but we still get narration from Raziel, and the music does return immediately after this cutscene.
Kain is deified. The clans tell tales of him. Few know the truth. He was mortal once, as were we all. However, his contempt for humanity drove him to create me and my brethren. I am Raziel, firstborn of his lieutenants. I stood with Kain and my brethren at the dawn of the Empire. I have served him a millennium. Over time, we became less human and more divine. Kain would enter the state of change and emerge with a new gift. Some years after the Master, our evolution would follow. Until I had the honor of surpassing my lord. For my transgression, I earned a new kind of reward. Agony. There was only one possible outcome. My eternal damnation. I, Raziel, was to suffer the fate of traitors and weaklings, to burn forever in the bowels of the Lake of the Dead. Cast him in. Tumbling, burning with white-hot fire, I plunged into the depths of the abyss. Unspeakable pain, relentless agony. Time ceased to exist. Only this torture and a deepening hatred of the hypocrisy that damned me to this hell. An eternity passed, and my torment receded, bringing me back from the precipice of madness. The descent had destroyed me, and yet I lived.
Raziel, you are worthy. I know you, Raziel. You are worthy.
What madness is this? What pitiful form is this that I have come to inhabit? Death would be a release next to this travesty.
You did not survive the abyss, Raziel. I have only spared you from total dissolution.
I would choose oblivion over this existence.
The choice is not yours.
I am destroyed.
You are reborn. The birth of one of Kain's abominations traps the essence of life. It is this soul that animates the corpse you lived in. And that, Raziel, is the demise of Nosgoth. There is no balance. The souls of the dead remain trapped. I cannot spin them in the wheel of fate. They cannot complete their destinies. Redeem yourself. Or if you prefer, avenge yourself. Settle your dispute with Kain. Destroy him and your brethren. Free their souls and let the wheel of fate churn again. Use your hatred to reave their souls. I can make it possible. Become my soul reaver, my angel of death.
It is really a shame that I had to remove the music from that cutscene because it is amazing. I mean, it was back in the day as well, but the updated graphics, it just looks so damn good. And then even after all this time, the voice of Tony J as the Elder God is still fantastic. I go into the settings to disable the hints, that way there's not a bunch of stuff popping up on the screen. And now we are going to be bombarded with a few early game tutorials, but we're going to try and get through those as fast as we can.
These gates twist space, laying a path across great spans.
The beginning of the game is really front-loaded with those cutscenes, so we're going to be bombarded with a few of them still going forward. And those are just going to be the walk this way, talk this way, fight this way tutorials. They do start spacing those cutscenes out after we leave the Underworld. The big object that I interacted with in the first room is going to be a warp gate, which is going to be the way of fast traveling across the map. Now that's the only one that we've unlocked so far, so we really can't go anywhere, but those will be very useful later in the game.
The old hunger has left me. I have no desire for blood.
You are changed. Your bloodthirst is replaced by a deeper need. You have become a devourer of souls. To sustain your strength, you must hunt the lost spirits of the Underworld and consume the souls of your enemies.
I just need to fully heal in order to advance out of this area, and while Raziel is devouring souls to do that, it is mention worthy that in this remaster you can switch between the old and the new graphics. And the reason that's coming to mind is because while Raziel is feeding, if I were to rotate the camera, you would be able to see where the lower half of his jaw has fallen off, which you could do that as well with the original graphics, but it was a little bit harder to tell exactly what you were looking at. It just wasn't as detailed, so I thought that was pretty nifty. And after doing the health recovery tutorial, next up we have a jumping tutorial.
Your wings, though ruined, are not without purpose. Take hold of them as you leap, and they will carry you across this chasm.
We finish up the jumping tutorial by gliding across this ridge, and then we only have 3 tutorials to go. One is going to be combat in the spectral realm, one is going to be shifting into the material realm, and the last one is going to be battling in the material world.
What scabrous wretches are these?
Slua, the scavengers of the Underworld. Their feral hunger has claimed countless souls, spirits who now shall never find their rest.
Okay, time for combat tutorial number 1, Raziel versus the Slua. These guys really are not bad to beat whatsoever, although they can be a little bit annoying, because whenever their health gets low, they will start to run away from you. And that is especially aggravating because you have to beat them. You know whenever you've done that because their bodies will become transparent, and then you can devour their souls. Although if you're like me, you might make the mistake of defeating them, they become transparent, and then you try to leave. Only if you try to do that, the barrier is still going to be there and you can't leave. So regardless of whether or not you need the health, you have to devour their souls. Now that the Slua fight is over, it is time to escape the Underworld and get back into the material world.
These portals are your conduit between the spectral and material realms. With their aid, you may gather matter and will yourself to become manifest in the physical world. This is taxing, however. Your strength must first be fully restored. You require no conduit to return to this plane. You may abandon your physical body at any time. Sustain your strength to prolong your manifestation in the physical world. If you fail to feed or absorb too many wounds, this fragile matter will dissolve.
We have escaped the Underworld and phased into the material world for the very first time. There's also a lot around us, but in the background there is a big gate. Make note of that because eventually that's going to be relevant after we beat the very first boss.
You are young yet, Raziel. You still retain many of your vampiric weaknesses. Immersion in water, while not fatal, will dissolve your physical body, forcing your return to the spirit world. Be aware that in the spectral realm, water has neither heft nor lift. It stands as thin as air.
We need to return to the Sanctuary of the Clans where Kain ripped out Raziel's wings earlier. We are not going to be able to do too much there, but it is a required stop in our tour of Nosgoth, and then we can move on to the next destination.
What are these creatures?
Do you not recognize them? They are the children of your brother, Dumah.
That's impossible. These foul, scuttling beasts could not be kin of our high blood.
Do you suppose that time stood still for you, Raziel? Much has changed since you passed from the world of men.
I knew my opponent's weaknesses, having suffered them myself. Physical wounds are fleeting. A vampire's immortal flesh begins to close as soon as it is cleaved. Vampires need only fear those wounds that impale or inflame. Water scorches like acid, and fledglings are devastated by sunlight's touch. I would have to modify my tactics to suit my foes.
These first two vampires are really not clever at all. Most of the time I'll just run into the beam of sunlight and they'll run into it after me and set themselves on fire. I do not do that here, but it is an effective tactic.
Unfettered from the flesh, a creature's soul fades swiftly into the spectral realm. Draw it in quickly, Raziel, or you will be compelled to follow.
I do not know why the vampires suddenly forget that they are combustible, but if they commit to that terrible decision, this fight is over very quickly. This time around, I elect to throwing one of the vampires into the sunlight, and the other one gets thrown up onto one of the stakes on the wall, impaling it.
Your physical prowess surpasses what you knew in life. Even massive obstacles can be moved effortlessly.
Time to get accustomed to something you are going to be seeing very frequently in this game. It's going to be Raziel moving around a gigantic stone block. I really enjoy this game, but if anything gets overused in it, it is definitely the block puzzles. Here is an example of us moving a block into place so we can use it to reach a ledge. We also have situations where blocks need to be moved, revealing secret passageways. Then there are situations where blocks need to be pushed into walls, then they act like keys and open up some door or secret tunnel. These blocks even become drain stops and are used to set things on fire. Just all kinds of crazy stuff with these blocks, but now we are at the Sanctuary of the Clans.
My God! The Sanctuary of the Clans reduced to ruin. Beyond these walls lay the pillars of Nosgoth, the seat of Kain's empire. How humble it now appeared, collapsing into the dust of its former magnificence. And yet,
I had only just emerged. In the instant between my execution and resurrection, centuries had apparently passed.
This world is wrecked with cataclysms. The earth strains to shrug off the pestilence of Kain's parasitic empire. The fate of this world was preordained in an instant by a solitary man. Unwilling to martyr himself to restore Nosgoth's balance, Kain condemned the world to the decay you see. In that moment, the unraveling began. Now it is nearly played out. Nosgoth teeters on the brink of collapse. Its fragile balance cannot hold.
Once upon a time, Kain faced a decision where he could sacrifice himself to save the world, but instead he chose to rule it, and the world has been falling apart ever since. We need to confront Kain inside the Sanctuary of the Clans, but we don't really have a way to get in there yet. So instead, I am going to have Raziel continue his trip down memory lane, and he is going to be going to the Lake of the Dead. I'm sure he's going to be thrilled about that. Who wouldn't want to see the place where they died? On the way to the lake, I'm going to have Raziel kill off all these easy vampires in the area just outside the Sanctuary. They are easy because most of them are not going to be alerted to Raziel's presence. And whenever they're not aware that he is there, you can throw a spear at them and it kills them instantly. Just make sure you don't screw up like I did. Either leave the spear in them or devour their soul. If you do not devour their soul and you take the spear out of them, they're going to come back alive and try to fight you. I screwed up doing that just a moment ago, and I need to do a little bit better about that going forward, but fortunately none of these enemies are very difficult, so I can afford having a mistake or two. Once I get Raziel beyond the Lake of the Dead, I'm not going to have the luxury of just stealth killing every single vampire I come across. I still kill a bunch of them, but around that point in the game, it's kind of rare when they do not know that you are there. So instead of sneak attacking all of them, I'm going to start introducing a variety of kills at that point. And we do have some incentive to kill off these enemies early in the game because Raziel's health is going to continuously deplete. So he does need to be devouring souls or he's going to fall back into the spectral realm. That is not always going to be the case, and whenever that does change, I will start running away from more enemies, that way I save a little bit of time in this playthrough. Not to worry though, there are still going to be plenty of fights. Raziel is not just going to suddenly turn into a pacifist, but that just means I won't necessarily be killing every single vampire that I see. That would definitely be a pointless effort because after activating that warp gate, whenever Raziel walks back outside, you see that the vampire I killed just before going through that door, it has respawned. So if you're gone long enough, vampires do come back. There are a few exceptions, but most of them do respawn eventually, so trying to kill them all is not really going to benefit you.
This, at least, had remained constant. The endlessly swirling vortex of the abyss, my tomb, and the womb of my rebirth. Though much of Nosgoth's landscape had changed, these cliffs gave me my bearings. My clan territory was to the west. I was anxious to see how my descendants had fared during the centuries of my absence.
So does everyone else have the same feeling that after being killed as a traitor, Raziel's clan probably did not fare very well after he died? I just feel like maybe we should set our expectations a little bit low. I mean, maybe I could be wrong, there might be a welcome home party just waiting for him to show up. In fact, let's go ahead and leave this vampire to live in this room for the rest of his unlife, and let's go find out. I mean, this is kind of like a welcome home party, just kind of the worst possible one. And our two party planners, the two Dumah vampires, I believe those are the only two that you are required to kill the entire time that you are in Raziel's territory. But it is a little bit early to be running away from every single enemy, so the vampires are not going to be getting off that easy. But yeah, picking apart what we are seeing on screen, the two Dumah vampires being here, that is probably an indication that Raziel's clan is no longer here, and somewhere in the midst of the power struggle that would have occurred between the brothers after Raziel died, it seems members of the other clans have decided to call this territory their own. And considering we're just running into Dumah's vampires, I guess it was his clan that did it. And considering we just run into Dumah's vampire clan in this area, I guess it is safe to assume that it was them that took over the property. And okay, almost done with these two vampires. I impaled the first one but failed to devour its soul in time, so that spear is going to stay inside of him for all of eternity. And I had to find another way to kill the remaining vampire, and the fire seemed like a pretty good way to go about it.
Utter desolation. My once proud kin wiped from this world like excrement from a boot. I knew the hand that wrought this deed.
There are two vampires that are just hiding behind some columns at the very top of the stairs. You can see them if we hop up here. And while I try and fail to stealthily kill them, I'll go ahead and reflect on what Raziel's probably thinking about right now. So Raziel's just going to have to come to terms with the fact that if you were murdered by your ruler and viewed as a traitor, not so happy things are going to happen to the people who are loyal to you and living in your territory following your death. And as we are seeing, Raziel's clan got the genocide treatment, and now the squatters from Dumah's clan have taken over. Other than this jarring moment for Raziel, there's not really a long-term reason for us to be in his territory. Nothing else really ever happens here, so it is just going to be a pit stop for us as we make it to the next territory. I guess one useful thing that we can do while we are in Raziel's old nation is activate the warp gate that is here. That way if we ever need to return to the spot, save for any optional items, we can do that pretty quickly. Because while there's not really much of a story reason to return to Raziel's territory, there are a bunch of optional items that you can get in this area. So having the warp gate available to you, I mean, it definitely could not hurt. Plus there's also an achievement for enabling all of the warp gates, so if you're interested in that, this is going to be on the list of ones that you have to get, so you may as well go ahead and knock it out. With that enabled, all I need to do now is leave this territory so I can reach Melchiah's Necropolis. But then I look over here and I have to ask myself, what in the Sir Isaac Newton's laws of motion is going on? You know what? I don't have an answer for that. We're just going to keep on going and act like we never even saw that. Goodbye, Dumah Vampire. Enjoy falling endlessly while you were just a few feet from the ground. I would kill you, but leaving you alive now sounds much funnier. Right over there where I just killed the vampire is going to be a flooded portion of Raziel's territory. Water will kill us, so there's no reason for us to try going in it. If we were to shift into the spectral realm and explore down there, there's really nothing to find at this part in the game, so don't worry about that right now, although that will come up again later on. Going in the opposite direction of that flood zone, we are going to take out a few vampires standing between us and a courtyard in Raziel's territory. And as I am taking out those vampires, I'm now reflecting on all the ways I've managed to kill them because we're starting to stack up a pretty good variety. I have killed them with spears. I'm going to kill this one with a torch and set it on fire. I've also set them on fire by throwing them into bonfires. I've set them on fire by throwing them into sunlight. And I have killed them by throwing them onto spikes on the wall. About the only thing I have not done yet is shove one into water, but that's definitely going to happen eventually. My point here being I'm killing vampires in a variety of ways and I'm having a really good time doing it. The courtyard is going to have a drawbridge tower in the middle of it, and we want to climb the stairs to that tower and get inside of it. Whenever I do manage to make it inside the tower, there is going to be a dial in the middle of it. That dial is going to be pointing in a specific direction, and whatever direction it is pointing in, that is going to be the drawbridge that you lower if you pull a handle nearby. Now this early in the game, you don't really have to worry about that too much. You do not have the means to turn that dial, so really you only have one direction that you can go in. And that is going to be the direction that we need to go in to reach Melchiah's Necropolis. So no big deal. But like I was saying earlier, in Raziel's territory, the only reason to ever return here is to get optional items, and sure enough, whenever you do have the ability to move that dial, the other bridges that can be lowered are your means of getting to more optional items. So we're really not going to come back here and explore that because I'm not really doing optional items in this video. And since I am not returning, I wanted to make sure that I pointed that out for anyone who may want to explore it in their playthrough if, whenever you do get the necessary ability, that sounds interesting to you.
No! Please!
I didn't recognize these flayed racks of flesh. Their scent was vampiric. They gnawed upon their victim's carcass like dogs.
Welcome to the Necropolis, the area that we are going to be exploring for a while. It includes some new enemy types like the decaying ghoul vampires that can tunnel underground and come after you. There's also going to be a random vampire hunter around here somewhere. I'm going to spare him though because I want the humans to eventually worship Raziel.
This charnel house bore the unmistakable marks of Melchiah's clan. To what depths had our dynasty plummeted if these ghouls were the descendants of my high-born brother? Were they so debased as to recruit fledglings from the desiccated corpses here interred?
I'm just going to go ahead and pick up a new staff spear-like weapon over here. It is going to be one that is specific to this area. Then I try to avoid that decaying ghoul vampire and run away. That does not go great for me because he does end up tunneling underground and ambushing Raziel. That's alright though, he is just going to be a minor distraction, and while I am taking care of him, I will go ahead and explain something that I just said. I mentioned that I want the humans to worship Raziel. The mechanic behind that is if you do not kill humans and you exclusively kill vampires, eventually the people will see Raziel as a savior and worship him. And since they are no longer trying to kill you, that effectively removes an enemy type from the game. It just gives you one less thing to deal with.
My brother Melchiah was made last, and therefore received the poorest portion of Kain's gift. Although immortal, his soul could not sustain the flesh, which retained much of its previous human frailty. This weakness, it seemed, was passed on to his offspring. Their fragile skins barely contained the underlying decay.
This Necropolis region is where we are going to find and fight the very first boss of the game, although it is going to take a bit of effort getting to him. And you can kind of see that already unfolding as we are traveling through the area. Like we had to move that block in place so we could reach this elevated portion of the Necropolis where Melchiah's mural is. And from here we can reach a warp gate room that gives us access to even more of the Necropolis. And okay, the vampire is stunned. Raziel picks up the vampire, he shoots and somehow misses by a wide margin. And on the second try, we get the fiery vampire we wanted. But yeah, a little bit of problem solving was needed to get here, but beyond the warp gate, that's when we really have to deal with a bunch of puzzles. And puzzles are going to be the main theme of this game. I mean, sure, we have combat in this game, but it is pretty basic. We don't really have the greatest amount of melee moves. We don't get the widest variety of weapons. And whenever it comes to the most meaningful fights in the game, Raziel is going to be fighting opponents that he cannot overpower with his bare hands or with just basic weapons. Instead, the boss fights are also basically going to be puzzles. Raziel has to find a way to beat them. So whether you are just trying to reach them or you are trying to fight them, puzzles are going to be a major part of the most meaningful fights of Soul Reaver, and you are going to be spending most of the game solving them. Now this is not my very first playthrough of the remaster, so I am somewhat already familiar with these puzzles, but not nearly enough to where I have them memorized. Still, I really shouldn't be getting stuck on anything either. In that previous playthrough, I made it almost to the very end of the game, but then I found myself in a soft locked situation. Now towards the very end of the game, there was a block puzzle where I needed to knock some blocks off of some ledges and they would fall to an area below. Whenever you reach that area below, you have to flip around the box and assemble them in a way where they create a picture that matches a symbol that is on the ground. The weird thing that happened to me was whenever I shoved one of the blocks off of the ledge, it should have landed on top of another block that was already on the bottom floor. But instead what happened was it went through that block, which created a situation where two blocks were occupying the same space.
Beware, Raziel. These wraiths are vampire spirits, fettered too long in the spectral realm. When their vampire natures adapt to this plane, they become eaters of souls. Do not allow these spirits to re-inhabit their corpses.
The Wraith is a new enemy type that we are going to start seeing in the Spectral Realm. I shifted into the Spectral Realm immediately, but if I had stayed in the Material Realm, this would have been hinted at because there would have been a dead vampire corpse on the ground, which is unusual because if they're not burnt or stabbed into something, they usually just reanimate. But because this vampire did not do that, its soul stayed in the Spectral Realm long enough to become a Wraith. Anyway, I was talking about how I got soft locked, and that was because two blocks were occupying the same space. And as a result of that, I could not pull them apart, and I could not even move the block. And since two boxes essentially fused together, I could not even complete the picture because I only had 3 blocks, and one of them was essentially missing because it was stuck inside the other. When that happened, my instinct was save the game, restart the game, and just hope that everything refreshes and respawns in the correct location. That made sense at the time, but whenever I reloaded the game, apparently that just broke it more. The boxes were no longer fused together, but instead they were just missing entirely. So I only had 2 blocks to solve a 4-block problem. And because I saved the game, there was no way around it. The game was stuck this way, I was locked, there was no finishing the game. So since I was stuck, all I could really do was just start all the way over at the beginning of the game and play it all over again. And since I had already effectively done one entire playthrough with the exception of maybe like the last 10 minutes, I was about as familiar with the game as I could possibly be, so I may as well just go ahead and start the new playthrough and start recording it so I could use it for my playthrough videos. Oh, I mentioned this earlier, but now I get to shove a block into a wall, it acts like a key, and it opens up the gate right next to me. Once that is open, I run into the next room, I jump up onto a beam, and okay, that's not right. There should be 2 platforms here. Okay, and you should be able to jump onto one, and that should raise the other. And if I do that, it still isn't there. Okay. Saving the game now, and I'll just quit and reload and hope that the platform shows up after I reload the game. Give me one moment, because I am going to have to backtrack all the way from the Underworld back to this point, and that's going to take me just a moment. I'll go ahead and cut to that moment. Okay, the reason why having only just one platform is such a big problem is because you do need both in order to progress. Like in the material world, you need to jump onto one of the platforms, it does not matter which. The weight of Raziel is going to carry down whatever platform you jump on, but that is going to cause the scale to turn so the other platform raises up. Then you can go back up to the beam I was standing on and shift into the spectral realm. And because weight and gravity really is not a thing there, you can jump onto the platform and it's not going to lower. Then you can use that newfound height to reach the ledge on the other side of the room. But if you only have one platform, the puzzle really does not work correctly and we are kind of stuck. So I may end up being soft locked for a second playthrough in a row here. And alright, moment of truth. Is there going to be a second platform for us to jump onto? And the answer is no. No, there is not. Alright, is there any other way I can get around this problem? You know what? I'll go ahead and try jumping on it anyway. Maybe it's just invisible and I can still use it. And nope. Alrighty then, I guess I get to start the game all over again. But I'm not going to make you watch every step of that again. Instead, I'm going to play through the game, I'm going to skip every single cutscene, and the moment I get back to this point where I'm at the exact same puzzle, that is where you will see me pick up the game again. I'll be right back. Alright, I am back in the room where that puzzle takes place. It took me, I'd say, less than 10 minutes to get back here. It's actually amazing how fast you can fly through the game if you're skipping the cutscenes. And yeah, I guess I could have just left this glitch out of the playthrough and just showed the version of it where I played through it entirely from start to finish without any problems. But I felt like this really weird experience needed to be shown. It was really unusual having 2 completely different issues lock my progress in back-to-back playthroughs. So I felt like showing that off a little bit. But yeah, I am back at the platform scales. And sure enough, this is what it is supposed to look like. There are 2 scales that I have the option of jumping onto. No more being stuck, I am able to progress in the game as was originally intended, and now we are able to finally make some progress and start advancing towards the very first boss of the game. Now that I have managed to raise that scale and get the platform up high again, I need to escape this pit that Raziel is in now, so I can go back all the way to the top, shift into the spectral realm, and then use the weightlessness of that scale to use it as an immovable object that I can walk across and then jump to the ledge on the other side. Before I can do that though, I need to open up the gate that is in this room, and to do so I have to do the exact same thing I did with the previous gate. I will be moving a block all the way across the room and getting it into position so that I can shove it into a hole in the wall. It is again going to be a key for me, and it is going to open up the gate whenever I do that. Before I can get it across the room though, the block has to be shoved into the pit. And once I do have the block into the pit, I have to drag it all the way to the other side, and then Raziel is going to need to lift the block onto some stairs. And then taking it one step of the stairs at a time, eventually I will be able to get it out of the pit and in front of that hole in the wall. So yeah, we have a little bit that we have to do before we can use the block as a key. And in order to slow us down a little bit more, inside of the pit are going to be more of Melchiah's decaying ghoul vampires. And along with them, you may notice some piles of dirt on the ground. The vampires can jump out of those piles of dirt, so they are an indication that they are going to continue to respawn so long as you are in the pit. And as a result, you do not want to stay in there any longer than necessary. I did want to get rid of the vampires that were already in the pit though, that way I'd have a little bit of time where there weren't any attacking me. And in order to do that, I took the staff that was impaled into one of the vampires out. It comes back to life, but now I have a weapon where I can fight against them, kill them, devour their souls, and get them out of the way. And yeah, after having seen that wraith, we know that whenever we remove an object that had killed a vampire from their body, that soul is able to return to the body. And if they have been in the spectral realm long enough, they can come back with some weird wraith-like abilities, even in their vampire form. And that lets them have that soul-eating ability where they continuously drain your health until you hit them and interrupt them. I don't really have to worry about that here because I do end up getting the block onto the stairs and I managed to avoid the rest of the spawning vampires in the pit. I can then use the block as a key like I was describing earlier, and we are going to be able to resume getting back up on top and finally solving this puzzle and moving on beyond it. And okay, I'm back on the top level now, and everybody, check this out. It is amazing what happens when everything loads up properly. I go ahead and I have Raziel glide over to the platform, and it works as intended. Truly remarkable. Anyway, we are going to go ahead and get over to the rift and switch back into the material world. And beside that, there is going to be one more block puzzle that we need to solve, then we can get out of this cursed area that I've had to return to on multiple playthroughs. And that is a lot of effort, having to do 2 different playthroughs just to get past this little room. Now this block puzzle is going to be slightly different than the previous ones. The thing that is different is that the blocks now have symbols on them, and if you were to look inside the holes that we need to shove the blocks into, there is going to be the exact same symbol. So we need to start flipping the blocks so that the symbol matches up with the wall exactly. And whenever those are matching and you shove the block into the hole, they are again going to act like keys and the gate is going to open. I have already been fumbling around with this in the background, and now I have the block lined up exactly as it needs to be, and now we are free. Now with Raziel's newfound freedom from this cursed room, we are going to be exploring the rest of the Necropolis. Just beyond the double doors is going to be a mountainside platform that happens to have a block on it. So the way that we need to use this new block is we need to shove it off of the ledge, and then drag it and stack it on top of another block nearby. While we are doing this, we find ourselves back at the Necropolis pond, and once those blocks are stacked on top of each other, I can then start dragging them into the right position. And the right position is going to be where when Raziel jumps on top of the 2 boxes, he can then reach another mountainside pathway. And the Necropolis is pretty good about hiding a few areas like this. This is the main one that we need for the story, but there are also some others for some optional items. And that involves going up some high points like this after you get the climbing ability, but also within the lake itself there are some secret passageways to interconnected areas. This new path is going to take us to the other side of the Necropolis pond. It might seem like another body of water, but they're actually connected through an underground cave. But on this more secluded side of the Necropolis pond, there is going to be a hidden building that we can enter. Raziel just needs to circle the waterside cliffs until he eventually reaches the door to that building. Just before the door and on the other side of it, there are going to be some vampires. I skipped the ones on the outside of the building, but on the inside, I do make a point to go ahead and try killing one of them. That is the main reason I picked up the spear, and I tried to throw it at the vampires hoping they were not aware of me and I could instantly kill one of them. But it turns out they were aware of me, and that did not work. But I am determined, so I went ahead and tried throwing the vampire into the sunlight. That fails, I completely miss. So instead I go ahead and pick up that staff one more time, and I just impale the vampire like I probably should have done from the beginning. I avoid the other vampires because I am back at full health, and at the very top of the ramp there is going to be a large elevator room. The big elevator in the middle of the room will not move at the moment though. While it is not operational, whenever I pull the lever right beside the elevator, it does not do anything. What I instead need to do is use the small elevator directly behind that. There is a switch on the wall, and I need to go down to this hidden maintenance hallway. And despite this area having an old decrepit mausoleum or cemetery feel, suddenly that changes right around here, and instead we get a bunch of machinery and an industrial feel. And there is a room around here where we need to tinker with the machinery. Along the way, I have Raziel's spear, an unsuspecting vampire. My intent was to heal again, but I really did not need to because I had barely lost any health since the very last vampire that I killed getting into this building. So yeah, it was unnecessary, but mentally I was just trying to keep my health up for the eventual boss fight. Behind the vampires is a ramp, and at the very top of it is going to be a door that takes us to the room where the machinery is that we need to manipulate. There are going to be 3 massive gears in the middle of that room, but one of them is not making contact with the others. Because of that, rotating the lever on the wall right next to them is not going to do anything. What we need to work with is the switch on the opposite side of the room. Flipping that switch gets the gear in place to where they are all making contact with each other. Now that none of them are detached, whenever we go back and rotate the lever, that is going to activate the elevator and we can finally use it. And now that the elevator is no longer out of order, we need to return to the big elevator room. I end up leaving through the exact same door that I used to enter this room to begin with, only this time I avoid the one remaining vampire that I left behind. Although there are 2 different paths that you can take to get into the machine room, the one I took has the vampires in your way, although if you took the other way, you would end up running into a bunch of vampire hunters, and since I want the vampire hunters and humans overall to worship Raziel, I avoided going down that side of the maintenance hallway, because I really want them to get to the point to where they do not view Raziel as a threat. Anyway, back in the big elevator room, the lever should now work, and we are going to be lowering the elevator to the next basement level. And once Raziel jumps into the basement pit, I go ahead and I have him remove a block from the wall, although in hindsight, I don't know if this is actually required. I may have just done an extra step for no reason. However, that block is a good landmark because there's going to be a path right next to it, and that's what Raziel needs to go down next. Because at the very end of this secret tunnel, there is going to be yet another puzzle that Raziel needs to solve. It is going to be a block puzzle, but this time it's going to involve fire. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that very brief machinery puzzle that we got to do, and I hope you enjoyed the break that we got from block puzzles, because now we are back to the very best thing about this game, and that is the block puzzles. And if you are concerned about us running out of these, don't you worry, we have so many more block puzzles to go as this game goes on. So yay! Joking around aside, there is going to be another path in this room, and it leads to an even deeper basement level. However, at the very end of that descending tunnel, your pathway is going to be blocked off by a gate that we cannot open yet. So Raziel's progress is blocked for the time being, so I just have him go back up to the top and start working on the block puzzle that I was talking about. Now, calling this a puzzle is probably a little bit generous. There's not really a whole lot open to interpretation with it. You're going to have 4 blocks. Each of them has a fire burning on top of it. You can drag these blocks, but you are limited to a set path. So right now you can basically just drag them in one direction, so it is really hard to screw this one up. What is going to happen is whenever you drag the block far enough down the path, the fire is going to line up directly beneath a beam and it's going to catch that wood on fire. And once it is engulfed in flames, eventually that piece of wood is going to fall down. We want to do that to all 4 of the beams that are holding up the elevator above us. And once we do that, the elevator is going to fall down to our current level. And after I just described that after we complete this puzzle, our reward is the elevator falling down and starting another puzzle, I had a really funny image in my head. And it made me wish that somehow Soul Reaver was a co-op game. Like, get me a player number 2 down here as well, because the game gives us no instruction as far as what exactly is going to happen once we solve this puzzle. And because of that, one of the 2 players may be in the way of the elevator, not knowing that when the puzzle is solved, the elevator is going to fall down, and then we get the glory of crushing our partner with the elevator after solving the puzzle. And I'll go ahead and address that I will occasionally rag on the block puzzles, making it seem like they're the worst thing in the world when really they're not. I am just exaggerating for comedic effect because there are quite a few of them in this game. But with the exception of 1 or 2 areas in the game, they're all pretty quick to get through. So enough poking fun at the block puzzles for right now. We are currently in part 2 of this current fiery block puzzle, and what we need to do is drag all 4 blocks to the centermost stage, and we want to place them in the corners of that stage. Once all 4 blocks are in place, they are going to act as a key. That is going to open up the gate at the very end of the descending path that we checked out earlier. And beyond that gate is going to be the arena where the first boss fight of the game is going to take place. So we are really close to that milestone, and while Raziel is finishing up the puzzle, I want to point out that I am getting some serious Resident Evil vibes from this scenery. And I don't necessarily mean that because of the cemetery, the undead, all the decomposing ghoul vampires that kind of remind me of zombies. No, what I mean is in Resident Evil, there are all these over-the-top puzzles and key items that you need to open up a door, and then that will give you access to a room with another key to open up another door that gives you access to a room to open up another door using another key item, and then so on and then so on and so on. And you continue doing this until you reach the next boss of the game in Resident Evil, typically speaking. And then it just leaves you wondering, wait, if I had to find 12 or 13 highly specific key items that there are not duplicates of, just to get into this room for this fight, how exactly did the creature that I am fighting or the person I am fighting get in this room to begin with? And that is what I am thinking about whenever it comes to the first boss of the game in Soul Reaver. Like, there's not a back door to this place or something like that. There's not a secret exit from the arena that we're about to be in. How the hell did he plan to get out of there?
Show yourself, creature.
Do you not recognize me, brother? Am I so changed?
Melchiah?
Yes, brother. You should have stayed where the Master sent you, Raziel. You will find Nosgoth less pleasant than you remember.
What has become of my clan? Answer me, little brother, or I will beat an answer from your horrid lips.
Everyone is afraid, sibling. You awake to a world of fear. These times of change are so unsettling. Do you think I feel no revulsion for this form? Do you believe for a moment that our Lord would risk his empire upon an upstart inheritance?
Enough riddles. What are you saying?
You are the last to die.
The fight has begun, and as you can see, attacking Melchiah directly does not really do any damage to him. Whenever you do make contact with him, about the most that happens is Melchiah will start laughing at you. However, if you do manage to hit his back just right, you can cause Melchiah to scream out in pain. To my knowledge, that does not actually do any damage to him, but it is a unique animation that is worth seeing. It also happens to be a trophy and achievement. Although Melchiah is just not wanting to cooperate with me here. But then finally it eventually happens and I get the achievement. It's named the Backstabber Trophy. And now we can move on to actually trying to kill Melchiah. There is going to be a trick to killing Melchiah, so check this out. And just like that, we have damaged Melchiah. That is something we are going to have to do again, because fighting the enemy directly is not how you really beat the bosses in Soul Reaver. At least not normally. Instead, the bosses are kind of like everything else in this game. They are a puzzle. And in order to defeat Melchiah, Raziel is going to have to be inspired by the French Revolution and use these gates to basically guillotine Melchiah. We just have to go on the other side of those gates, pull the lever to raise them, and wait for Melchiah to walk underneath them. Melchiah will break out of both gates after being impaled, and after doing that twice, the damage to that system will ultimately loosen up the lever right by Melchiah's throne. So now we have the task of trying to lure Melchiah into the cage in the very middle of the room. Once he goes through those bars and he's in the middle, we have to run over to that lever by the throne very quickly and then pull it before Melchiah has the opportunity to escape. Once we do that, we are going to win the boss fight. This is kind of where I want to be positioned, where Melchiah is on the opposite side of the cage, because while I'm here, he's not going to want to go all the way around the cage, he's going to try going through it to cut through the middle. And there he goes, we just won the fight.
Tell me, Melchiah, where can I find Kain?
The Master is beyond your reach, Raziel. He makes himself known when he sees fit, not when commanded.
done well, Raziel.
Am I reduced to this? A ghoul? A fratricide?
Elevated, Raziel, not reduced. Consuming Melchiah's soul has endowed you with a new gift. Insubstantial barriers such as these are no impediment to you in the spectral realm. Will yourself to pass through, and you shall.
Alright, prioritizing puzzle solving as well as using the environment to beat Melchiah instead of outright combat led to a victory. After beating Melchiah, I believe the fastest way out of the Necropolis is just to save your game, quit the game, go back to the main menu, reload your game, and whenever you do that, you're going to be returned back to the starting point of the entire game, back in the Underworld in the Elder God's Chamber. And after that, we are just a short walk through the Underworld away from facing off against our murderer. We are going to be seeing Kain.
With Melchiah's gift, your way is opened. Return to the seat of Kain's ill-omened empire. Its sterile silence has secrets yet to unveil.
Alright, the Elder God has clued us in, and now it is time to return to the Sanctuary of the Clans. I just need to run all the way up this passageway, that way we can make it to the Warp Gate room. And using that Warp Gate, we can go all the way back to the Lake of the Dead. That is going to be the closest point to the Sanctuary of the Clans, and once we get there, it should be a pretty short walk. Going this way is going to be faster than walking out of the Underworld, and it definitely would have been faster than trying to walk out of Melchiah's throne room, then back through the Necropolis, then back through Raziel's territory, then back through the Lake of the Dead, and then so on. So just overall, this is a pretty good time saver. Now I did save and reload the game to exit Melchiah's throne room and return to the Underworld, although I did do some stuff off screen. Using Melchiah's gift, there are a bunch of optional items I could pick up, so I decided to go ahead and collect those, and after I was done, I returned all the way back to the Underworld again, and everything from that point forward is what you are now seeing in this playthrough video. If you are curious about the optional items, I picked up a Force Glyph. That allows me to do a big force push against my enemies. And I also collected segments of a health emblem, which whenever you collect 5 of those segments, it extends your health bar. And if you want to know exactly how to get these items for yourself, I have videos covering that as well, and I'll be sure to put links to those in the description. Beyond these gates is where Kain's throne room is going to be at the base of the Pillars of Nosgoth. I could not get inside this building before, but there is a barred gate here, and courtesy of Melchiah's impermeability ability, I can go into the spectral realm and then pass through the bars. But going past that point, we find ourselves on a bridge that allows us to cross over a small pond. And whenever we use the rift to get back into the physical world, there are going to be 2 vampires on that bridge. I am going to immediately run at them, and use my newly acquired glyph to use a force push against them that shoves them into the water. That is going to kill them instantly. I don't really use the force glyph a whole lot, but this is one of the most useful times for it because it guarantees those 2 kills. Oh, and it is also an achievement if you manage to kill 2 different vampires with one use of the force glyph, so yeah, this is how you can get that pretty easily. After you kill those 2 vampires, the doors that were blocking our path further into the Sanctuary of the Clans, those now open. And then I just have Raziel go into the spectral realm to avoid any more enemies and then pass through all the bars. That is going to give us a pretty direct path back to the Pillars of Nosgoth where we are going to find Kain. Now there's not really going to be anything in here that's going to fight us or get in our way, making this a pretty calm walk all the way to that confrontation. And whenever that battle begins, if you do manage to beat Kain without taking any damage yourself, that is an achievement. I've already gotten it, so I'm not really going to be able to show it here, but that is something to strive for.
Raziel.
Kain!
The Abyss has been unkind.
I am your creation, Kain. Now, as before, you criticize your own work.
What have you done with my clan, degenerate? You have no right. What I have made, I can also destroy, child. Damn you, Kain! You are not God! This act of genocide is unconscionable! Conscience? You dare to speak to me of conscience? Only when you have felt the full gravity of choice should you dare question my judgment. Your lifespan is a flicker compared to the mass of doubt and regret that I have borne since Mortanius first turned me from the light. To know that the fate of the world hangs dependent on the advisedness of my every deed? Can you even begin to conceive what action you would take in my position?
I would choose integrity, Kain.
Look around you, Raziel. See what has become of our empire. Witness the end of an age. The clans scattered to the corners of Nosgoth. This place has outlasted its usefulness. As have you.
The Soul Reaver, Kain's ancient blade, older than any of us and 1,000 times more deadly. The legends claimed that the blade was possessed and thrived by devouring the souls of its victims. For all our bravado, we knew what it meant when Kain drew the Soul Reaver in anger. It meant you were dead.
Kain is going to teleport around the throne room into one of 3 different positions. In one stationary, he starts to charge up a really powerful spell. The first position he goes to always seems to be behind us, but his next teleports go to a location that kind of varies depending on where exactly in the throne room you are standing.
So it unfolds, and we are a step closer to our destinies.
I swore I saw a glint of satisfaction in Kain's eye when the Soul Reaver was destroyed. I did not understand the game that Kain was playing, but I knew the finishing move.
From this moment and ever afterward, you and this blade are inextricably bound. Soul Reaver and Reaver of Souls, your destinies are intertwined. By destroying the sword, you have liberated it from its corporeal prison and restored it to its true form, a radiant blade, its energy unbound. No longer a physical blade, it can only manifest itself in the material realm when your strength is fully restored. Once manifest, it will sustain you.
What are you, little soul? Another of Kain's creatures come to taunt this bound spectre.
I did not intend to disturb your rest.
Rest. A body is needed for sleep. Flesh and bones are required to recline. No, child. All I may do is watch and remember, ceaselessly conscious as this wretched world's history unfurls. Ghastly past, insufferable future, are they one and the same? Am I always here?
How have you come to haunt these pillars?
Kain refused the sacrifice. The Pillar of Balance, corrupted to its core, stands as a monument to his blind ambition. Now these pillars serve only to bind me here, my prison and eternal home, thanks to the avarice of your master, Kain.
That bastard can claim no allegiance from me.
Then we share a common foe, Raziel. Return here when you have need. Ariel remembers what others have forgotten. Far in the eastern mountains, A stifled titan stands in mute surrender, unwilling host to a parasitic swarm.
And alright, that is going to be the cryptic clue that Ariel gives us. So I could just say that Ariel is a ghost who was betrayed by Kain and is now willing to work with Raziel because of it. And that would be a factual statement. Like, I think that would be sufficient enough to make sense out of her minor role in this game. Although if you want a more detailed explanation about who she is, I will do my best to quickly condense that and summarize it for you, but this is a franchise with a lot of lore and sometimes it takes a while to explain. So yeah, that might not be super easy for me to do, but I am going to give it a try. So Ariel used to be a balanced guardian, but she was murdered and now her ghost haunts the pillars. Guardians are like representatives for different various concepts of life like death, nature, time, balance, conflict, things like that. And for every guardian, there is a pillar. And those pillars are the same ones being used for Kain's throne. Whenever Ariel died, her love interest, who was also a guardian, he went insane and he telepathically attacked all the other guardians. And that mental attack went on to drive them all mad and corrupted them. And because the pillars are linked to the guardians, whenever they were corrupted, so too were the pillars. That is visually represented by the pillars turning black and starting to crack. Long after Ariel died, Kain was also murdered and resurrected as a vampire by the death guardian Mortanius. And whenever the vampire Kain shows up at the pillars, Ariel finds him and convinces him to help her out with the corruption issue. To do that, Kain had to go around and kill all the remaining guardians. By doing that, whenever a guardian is killed, someone somewhere in the world is being born at the exact same time, and they are selected to be the very next guardian. So they would just kind of inherit the role, and because they are not corrupted, it would also cleanse their pillar. Kain would go on to kill all the guardians one by one until eventually only the balanced guardian was left. So Kain had to figure out who replaced Ariel after she died. But it turns out Kain was the one born at the exact same time as Ariel's death. So he was unknowingly the balanced guardian the entire time. So Kain had a choice. He could sacrifice himself, causing a replacement balanced guardian to be selected, and then uncorrupt his pillar, and then suddenly the world would have entirely new uncorrupted guardians. Or he could refuse the sacrifice and just keep himself alive. And as you can tell, Kain is still alive, so he did in fact refuse the sacrifice. And because he refused to kill himself, the pillar is still corrupt. And that is also why the centermost pillar is still black to this day. And because the corruption never truly ended, Ariel was never allowed to leave. And now Raziel is here, so Ariel moves on from being Kain's old advisor to now advising Raziel. I will go back to talk to Ariel occasionally, specifically after each boss fight, because after every single boss fight, she's going to have unique dialogue about the very next boss you're going to face, just giving you different kinds of advice, or more realistically, some really cryptic clues or descriptions. Basically, the only bosses that she does not give you advice about are going to be Melchiah and that first fight with Kain, and that's just because we had not met her yet. There is also a trophy for listening to all the advice that Ariel can give you, so I will be doing that in this playthrough. Oh, and the Elder God also has some information to share with us, so let's go ahead and listen to what he has to say.
Your brother Zephon's keep lies far to the east, beyond the ruins that greeted your first exit from the Underworld. He and his brood have cocooned themselves in a derelict cathedral, having murdered its human guardians.
And I am going to go ahead and save and reload the game, which brings me back to the Underworld. I'm also going to go ahead and stand on the platform and listen to what the Elder God has to say. It's mostly the same as before, but just a little bit different.
Seek out Zephon's lair, Raziel. Beyond the ruins that greet your exit from the Underworld. Armed with the Soul Reaver, you may gain entry where your path was previously blocked.
So yeah, that's basically all the same information we got outside the Sanctuary of the Clans, minus the detail about it being inside of a cathedral, which is where we are going to find our brother Zephon. Oh, and also omitting the detail about how they killed off all the worshippers within that cathedral. So yeah, Raziel's brother Zephon is going to be the very next person we cross off of the revenge list. And unfortunately, there's not really a warp gate that I have active near that cathedral area, so I am going to have to take my time and walk all the way out of the Underworld until I eventually reach the same area where we first went into the physical realm. Only this time I am not going to be using that rift to go back into the material world. Instead, I am going to stay in the spectral realm and use my new ability, courtesy of Melchiah, to pass through a barred gate that's going to give us access to that cathedral area, or at least access to its exterior. Before all of that though, I'm still having to walk through and jump through all the areas that we were using for tutorials back in the very beginning of the game. Fortunately, this time I am not having to deal with all the cutscenes, so I should be able to get out of here much faster. Just overall, getting out of here is not going to take nearly as long without the Elder God constantly interrupting us. And fortunately, I do end up leaving the Underworld without messing up any of the tutorial areas. It would have been pretty embarrassing for me to mess up one of those jumps and then have to do everything all over again. Then again, I guess I could have just re-recorded it, but this is already taking a while, so I would rather not start all the way over just to get the perfect recording. Now here we are back at the gate from the very beginning of the game, and we can use Melchiah's soul so that Raziel can change his permeability to pass on through. Once we are on the other side of that gate, we are introduced to a large building with a moat around it. We need to find a way inside of this fortress, which also means that we need to find a rift to get us back into the material world. This moat and the big fortress walls on the other side of it, those are going to be our next obstacles as we try to find our way inside so that we can reach the cathedral that has become Zephon's new home. And I believe that cathedral is very specifically referred to as the Silenced Cathedral. In order to open up the gates to the Silenced Cathedral, you do need the Soul Reaver. Our spirit sword is going to act like a key and it's going to open that door for us. So if you're looking at the sequence of the abilities we get from the boss fights, we technically could have come here right after beating Melchiah, but we would not have been able to get past that gate without beating Kain and getting the Soul Reaver. So yeah, there's no way to skip Kain and go directly to Zephon. I am just taking a moment to activate this warp gate, that way I can come back here if necessary later on. I shouldn't have to, but just in case. Also on the way inside of here, we ran into some human vampire hunters, but for the first time they are not trying to kill Raziel. Instead, they got to their knees and they put their arms up in the air to worship him. So I have killed the requisite number of vampires without killing any humans to where they will now start to worship Raziel. It is nice to know that they are not going to be a threat to me anymore, but there are still going to be some humans that try to kill Raziel regardless. There are not very many of those, but we are about to run into some of them within the Silenced Cathedral. Alright, time to stop being distracted by the warp gate and saying hello to all of Raziel's new loyal followers. So back to the moat, we are going to cross that bridge to the gate, and we are going to open it up using this Soul Reaver. Right after Raziel passes through the bars, immediately to his right is going to be a rift that is going to be our ticket back to the physical world. And that is when we are going to notice something interesting. The cathedral introduces us to the very next kind of vampires. Back at the Necropolis, Melchiah's vampires were a bunch of decomposing ghouls. But over here at the cathedral where Zephon took over, his vampires are going to be very bug-like. They mostly seem to take inspiration from spiders, so now we have spider vampires. When compared to all the other boss zones in the game, I think the Silenced Cathedral is the largest one. It also has the most puzzles between you and the boss. So you may not see me fighting and killing a lot of these spider vampires. I am just going to be trying to fly through the puzzles and reach the boss as fast as I can, which is still going to take a while. But otherwise, I could be here a really long time. Alright, that cutscene gave us an idea of the scale of the area around us. It also gave us an indication of where we need to go. So Raziel needs to start climbing these towers to reach that overlook or that balcony, just whatever you want to call it. Now all of these obstacles can be scaled in the material realm, although I feel like some of the jumps are easier in the spectral realm. And despite this being a really open area with a lot of points that you could potentially glide to, there's not really too much going on within these grounds. Really the only thing to do here is take the exact path you need to reach the Silenced Cathedral. There are no real rewards for exploring this area. Like whenever I was doing my videos on how to find all the optional items in this game, I was kind of surprised to see that there is nothing in that courtyard worth going out of your way for. So unfortunately, it is just kind of a barren spot. So I just kind of find that odd. We have a really large area we could explore, but we have no incentive to do so. Instead, we are going directly to the Silenced Cathedral. And on our way, we are going to see more spider vampires. This one specifically is wrapping up its victim in its webs. I don't bother fighting the very first one that I see, we're just going to leave him alone to enjoy his meal. And beyond him, through the double doors, is going to be a large ventilation room.
Once a testament to mankind's defiance of Kain's empire, this towering cathedral now stood derelict. The humans who worshipped here, dead for centuries. Its architects conceived this tower as a holy weapon against the vampire menace, a colossal instrument of brass and stone. The cathedral's pipes, once tuned to blast a deadly hymn, now stood silent, and these vacant spaces whistled their impotence.
I am going to make immediate use of the pipes that Raziel was referencing by shifting into the spectral realm. That is going to twist them into a different form that allows me to walk on them, or at least it allows me to walk on one of them. And I end up taking my time walking up this thing. I will even occasionally stop and I'll crouch and I'll crawl just to make sure there's no chance of me falling off. But I do eventually make it up onto the catwalk and I'm able to shift back into the material realm. On the slightly higher catwalk, I'm going to almost immediately run into a door, but I am going to skip that first door because the one I need is actually going to be the second door. I will eventually need to go into that first door, but for right now, there's really not anything in there that I need. But yeah, whenever I do go through that second door, we are going to run into something that is going to be a staple of the Silenced Cathedral. It is going to be more clear whenever I shift into the spectral realm and pass through the bars, but we are going to find ourselves inside of a room with a bunch of blocks and a bunch of holes in the wall. And on those blocks are going to be pictures that we need to flip around the right way, and then push them into the wall, which is going to complete a much larger mural. Now we are going to find these mural puzzles all over the place in the Silenced Cathedral. Well, actually, saying all over the place might be a bit of an exaggeration. I think there's like 4 of them. And in fact, one of those 4 is actually going to be optional. Regardless though, whenever trying to get through the Silenced Cathedral to reach Zephon, these puzzles are going to be the things that you spend the most amount of time doing. Also inside of this room are going to be 3 spider vampires that I try to avoid and just try to focus on the blocks. And it starts off pretty well because they kind of just ignore me whenever I'm trying to move around those first 2 blocks. But I do need to flip around those blocks quite a bit to get the picture just right. And eventually the spider vampires do take an interest in me. Whenever they do notice Raziel and go after him, I use the force glyph to push them away. That ends up knocking them into a stunned state, or at least it knocks most of them into that state. The big spider vampire manages to stay active. And whenever I go to fight it and try and finish it off, I accidentally initiate Raziel's execution animation, which I cannot cancel out of, and whenever I try using the Soul Reaver to destroy that vampire, well, it just kind of smacks me and depletes my health a little bit, which is still enough for the Soul Reaver to go away. Which means I no longer have a way of executing that spider. And with no more Soul Reaver, I guess I'm just stuck with the spider vampires. Because I was not aware of any other way to execute these spiders in this room. Although I am wrong, and I will be coming back to that. On one occasion I got kind of lucky because you can crush these spider vampires with these blocks. Although it's not the easiest thing to set up, but in one case I managed to stun a spider vampire and flip the box on top of it, and no more spider vampire. But you would be surprised how often you crush one of these spider vampires whenever you are just moving around the blocks, kind of just avoiding them and trying to complete the puzzle. And around this time I began to wonder to myself, wait a minute, weren't there 3 spider vampires just a moment ago? I only killed one of them and there's this one on top of the box. Where is the third one? And if you have not already noticed what happened to the 3rd spider vampire, well, just keep that in mind because we are going to be coming back to that as well. To set up what I want to say about that though, I need to acknowledge I was making the situation much harder on myself than I needed to. Because I was thinking to myself, the Soul Reaver is gone, so I cannot kill the vampires with that. There are no weapons in this room that I can pick up, so I can't use those to kill the spider vampires. So in my mind, I was like, okay, I can't really do anything to kill these vampires unless I go into the spectral realm and fully heal and get the Soul Reaver back. But I was not willing to do that because it kind of felt like a waste of time. So in my mind, I was without a way to make these spider vampires leave me alone long term. And I was doing my best to ignore it and just shove around the blocks as needed. And in all fairness, in this playthrough, there were moments when they were just missing me a ton. And to really show off how badly these vampires can miss you whenever you're just moving blocks and not trying to fight them, take a look at the screen right now. Because right after I get done pushing this one block into the wall, right after that is when things start getting really funny with this spider vampire. I could not believe just how much this spider vampire was missing with its attacks as I was trying to move the very next block across the room. So even though it is persistent, it really was not doing the best job getting in my way. So even though I was making this more difficult on myself, in the grand scheme of things, everything was still going pretty well. And I guess now after all that setup, I should finally explain what I mean whenever I keep saying that I was making things much harder on myself. Going back to my previous point, I no longer have the Soul Reaver or any weapons I can pick up to kill that vampire. But that did not mean that I was without a way of killing it, because I did not realize there was an option in this room that I could have been using. I want to go back to something I mentioned a moment ago. Whenever I used the Force Glyph to push back all 3 vampires, one of them seemingly disappeared. I did not know where because I had no recollection of killing it. Well, just barely in my view, if I looked hard enough, in one of the corners of this room, the feet of that spider vampire can be seen. It turns out whenever I used that Force Glyph, I pushed it up into the air, and it got impaled on a spiked decoration in the corner. So this whole time, I could have been attacking the spider vampires, and eventually whenever they were stunned, I could have thrown them on top of those spikes. And so long as I did not devour their souls, their bodies would stay there, and they would not respawn. So this whole time that I've been just trying to run away from the vampires or trying to ignore them, kind of just working around them, that was completely unnecessary and I could have removed them from this puzzle entirely. But I did not realize that, and well, here we are. And I just really quickly tried to finish the puzzle and I pushed all the remaining blocks into the wall, but for some reason, the puzzle does not solve. The cutscene I was expecting does not happen. Well, it turns out one of the blocks I shoved into the wall earlier, it is not properly aligned with the picture and I actually need to take it out and flip it over a little bit more and then put it back in. Upon realizing I could kill the vampires using that spike, and after this mistake, I did kind of consider for a moment just starting the whole thing over again and re-recording, but it does not seem like it was that big of a time loss, so I am just going to run with this and finish the puzzle. With the mural puzzle over, we get a cutscene that shows the interior of the room that we passed over earlier through the door that we just kind of skipped. If we had gone to that room before completing this puzzle, we would have seen a switch on the wall, but it would have been out of our reach. But with that puzzle completed, a platform comes out of the wall and we can jump up onto that, and then we will be able to reach that lever. And fortunately, because we went in the correct order, doing the puzzle first and then going to that room, we avoided being harassed by the spider vampires for no reason. Now I have Raziel make his way out of that puzzle room and back onto the walkway that we were on previously. And once we are back inside of that ventilation room back on the walkway, I'm going to make my way to a switch that was on the wall the entire time previously, but I also skipped it. Now, however, I'm going to flip that switch and a new platform is going to lower from the ceiling. And once that platform stops moving, I jump on top of it, and then Raziel's weight is going to carry it further onto the ground where a latch is going to catch it and prevent it from going back up. Even though I'm doing this now, we could have done it before, I just decided to go in this order instead. So you don't really need to wait until after the puzzle, you could do this in advance. But what you just saw is exactly why we are backtracking to the room that we skipped earlier, the one with the switch on the wall that was previously out of our reach. After completing the puzzle and getting the platform that we can stand on whenever we flip that switch, basically the exact same thing is going to happen at the other latch that we passed by on the walkway. We end up flipping that second switch, another platform lowers from the ceiling, and then we are going to make our way back onto the walkway where Raziel is going to jump onto that platform, weigh it down, and then let the latch lock it in place. And then once I have both of the platforms locked in place, we get a cutscene showing a ventilation system opening up at the very bottom of the ventilation room. Whenever that is opened up fully, we are going to get an airflow that Raziel can use. So whenever Raziel jumps and glides, the wind is going to catch his wings and then carry him to a higher level of the Silenced Cathedral. So I guess you could consider that transition reaching the second portion of the Silenced Cathedral. I definitely do not think we're quite at the halfway point yet, but we are getting pretty close. I would divide the Silenced Cathedral into 3 different parts. We just completed part 1, we're working on part 2, and eventually we are going to rise to part 3. But yeah, we still have a decent amount of cathedral puzzles left to do. Inside of here we have a block puzzle that's going to involve something a little bit different than before. Like, I thought this was going to be another picture-related block puzzle, but this one is going to be a little bit different. Before I begin trying to solve it, though, I begin addressing the spider vampires in the room. So I go rip a pipe out of the wall to use as a weapon and start beating the crap out of the spider vampires, and I eventually impale one of them and kill it. Then I jump onto the platform where we originally had a rift that could take us back into the material world, and I try devouring its soul. It would be good to have the health to prolong the amount of time that I have to try and solve this puzzle. But for whatever reason, the soul just refused to cooperate with me and it just got stuck on the ledge of the platform. Now, how a substance like a soul, which does not have to abide by any real laws of physics, gets stuck on some bricks, I have no idea, but that is what I was dealing with. I was a little bit annoyed that I could not devour that soul and get the Soul Reaver back, but I figured I could just take the pipe and kill both of these spider vampires, get their souls to resurface, devour them then, and possibly get back to full health. I ended up taking a little bit too much damage in the process for that to be realistic though, so instead I just abandoned the idea of killing the vampires for a moment, and I moved the stack of blocks over to the platform, and I began shoving them onto the ground one by one until eventually all of them are on the ground, and then I could start flipping them around as necessary to solve the puzzle. With all of them on the ground, I shift my focus back to the spider vampire that is remaining. Since I left the pipe inside of the other one, I cannot take it out or I'm going to risk the spider vampire coming back alive and having to fight it again. So I rip the other pipe from the wall, begin beating the crap out of it, impale it, and I devour its soul just to really give myself a little bit more life. I definitely was not going to get the Soul Reaver back by doing that, but I might have enough life to survive the continuous degradation of my health bar and solve the puzzle before I have to shift into the spectral realm. So okay, let's go ahead and talk about what exactly makes this puzzle different from the previous one. The previous puzzle had us flipping around blocks in order to form a picture on the wall. This time though, we are not going to be trying to put together a mural, and that's because these blocks do not have any pictures on them. Instead, they have hexagon-shaped holes inside of them, and those holes will pass through to other sides of the blocks. We need to identify the holes in the wall with the exact same pattern of hexagon holes in them that matches up with the sides of the blocks that we are going to be moving around. So yeah, a lot of this is going to be me flipping around the blocks and rearranging where the hexagon holes are on those blocks, so that whenever we shove them into the holes in the wall, everything lines up just right. I think functionally what we are doing here is whenever we shove the blocks into the walls and those holes line up, the blocks then kind of act like a pipe system. And with the blocks in place, we're connecting those pipes, and that kind of makes sense because opening up airways is a big part of the way that we progress through the Silenced Cathedral. And if I'm right, and these are basically pipes that we have to connect together using the blocks, then what we are doing is setting up a way for all the airflow to eventually reach another ventilation system that we are going to be using later. If we did not do this, then we're not going to get the airflow necessary in order to ascend to the next part of the Silenced Cathedral. Which I am almost done, and immediately after this, there's only going to be one more block puzzle on this level, and I also think it's going to be the last one for the entire area. Like, I can't think of any more on the third level either. So yeah, let's go ahead and wrap this one up and then move on to the final block puzzle, and then we are finally done with these things for a little while. Alright, solving that puzzle caused a glass sphere to break, and inside of it was a squared weight with handles on it. The game has not yet told us what exactly that is for, but apparently we are going to need to break all 4 of those spheres. So I will go ahead and exit this area, and I will make my way to the next puzzle, that way we can break another one of those spheres. I shift into the material realm, and right beside the door is one of the Cathedral guards. Now I mentioned earlier that most humans are going to be worshipping Raziel because I have only been killing vampires. But the Cathedral Guards are one of the very few types of humans that do not care what you do, regardless of how many vampires you kill, they are still going to try and kill you regardless. They just see him as a trespasser and a non-human, so they are going to try and impale him, throw knives at him, just whatever they can do. Fortunately, they are very easy to avoid, so I'm not going to be bothering with them today. Now I'm going to have Raziel shift into the spectral realm phase through these bars, and inside this room is going to be the exact same kind of puzzle that we just completed a moment ago. It's going to be another one of those where there are hexagon holes in the blocks, and within the holes in the wall there are also more hexagon shapes. Once more, we are going to have to line those up in order to solve the puzzle. And inside this puzzle room there are going to be 2 more spider vampires. I have a bit easier of a time with these 2. The first of which I managed to kill with the Soul Reaver, but the second one does end up hitting me. And of course that causes the Soul Reaver to go away because I am no longer at full health. So I'm going to have to resort to stabbing it with a pipe and executing it that way. I have to say overall, when looking back at all of my playthroughs, this is some of the worst luck I have had against these spider vampires whenever trying to clear them out in order to get through these puzzles. Granted, it is not the worst luck I have had, but it is still pretty up there. Bad luck or not, I felt like it was entertaining enough to where I would still use it for this playthrough. That is especially true whenever it came to that very first puzzle, whenever that spider was trying to attack Raziel and just kept missing over and over whenever I was dragging that block across the room. And yeah, somehow it just continued to miss non-stop, and I thought to myself that was just way too funny to leave out of this video. But yeah, without funny moments like that, I may have just restarted this whole thing and tried to get through the entire area a lot faster and a lot more cleanly. Because yeah, I definitely could have done these a little bit faster, but I don't know, something about all the little mistakes and things just not quite going according to plan made this one interesting to me, so I just went with it. Although even though I find it amusing that all these little things did not go according to plan, that does cause these puzzles to get solved at a rate that's a bit slower than I would have liked. I let it go for this playthrough, but because I am going as slow as I am, which I'm not exactly going like crazy slow, but still slower than I would like. But yeah, there is a downside to that because taking all this time to solve the puzzle causes these spiders to have enough time to respawn. Whereas ideally, I could kill them off at the very beginning of the puzzle and then rush through the puzzle and solve it before they ever have the opportunity to return to the room. Now I do not achieve that in this playthrough, so I am eventually going to have to deal with them again. That's going to be alright though. After all, this room at least gives me some weapons to work with. I also have the Soul Reaver back now, and I should keep it as long as I don't get hit, so everything should go pretty smoothly. And alright, this puzzle has us pushing around 6 blocks. I am now pushing the 4th one into place within the wall, so we are a little bit over halfway through with the puzzle, and it's about this time that the spider vampires decide to show back up. So at least I got over halfway done before I had to deal with them again. And of course he hits me and removes the Soul Reaver, so it's back to smacking him with the pipe. And with that we smack the crap out of him a few times, impale him, and then we call it a day. Fortunately, even though it hit me, it did not do very much damage, so whenever I devour its soul, it returns me back to full health and I get the Soul Reaver back. And not long after that, the second vampire spawns back into the arena as well. Only this time the spider vampire does not hit me, I just slash it a few times with the Soul Reaver before blowing it up. So okay, we are done with those 2 spider vampires. They should not spawn back in time before I push the remaining blocks into the wall. Although there are still plenty of more spider vampires all around the cathedral, so I am far from done dealing with the likes of them. And yeah, hopefully everything goes much more smoothly with those subsequent vampires than it did in here. And alright, we're down to the very last block, we're pushing it into the wall, and we are going to have one more glass shattering moment. Glass shattering moment concluded, and now we are free of the block puzzles for the foreseeable future. Oh god, I really hope I didn't forget any of them. There is one other block puzzle that could be done. That is also here on the 2nd level, but fortunately it is optional and I am not going to be doing it. If you were to do it, your reward would be a health emblem piece. Fortunately, I covered that in a separate video, so you don't have to watch that unless you just really want to. As a result, we only had to deal with 3 consecutive block puzzles. We are not going to be dealing with a 4th one. Next up is going to be the timed puzzles. You just saw me slap a bell with the Soul Reaver, jump through a window, and glide across the ventilation room. Now I am running down this corridor to smack the other bell. If you are quick enough when doing this and you hit both bells, the noise is going to be loud enough or the pitch is going to be just precise enough to where the glass is going to shatter in the neighboring room. That window connects to the hallway where we smacked the very first bell, and it's going to be very important to have that glass removed for you to solve the very next puzzle. For the next timed puzzle on the side of the hallway, there is going to be a block with some hieroglyphics on it. We are going to need to move that out of the way. And in order to do that, we are going to need to return to the hallway with the bell that we smacked earlier. There is going to be a lever in that hall that we need to rotate. Whenever we rotate that lever, the hieroglyphic block is going to move out of the way, revealing a new path. But it is only going to remain open for a very brief amount of time. Simply rotating the lever and then trying to run to that block, you're going to run out of time and it's going to close before you get there. So instead, you need to shift into the spectral realm immediately after rotating that lever. And in that dimension, time does not move the same way. So once you are in that dimension, you basically have unlimited time to leisurely walk your way over to that hieroglyphic block. And then we are going to be free to explore the rest of level 2 of the cathedral. we are going to be going into a tower-like room where pipes wrap around and circulate all the way to the top, allowing us to ascend. And we can kind of use those like a staircase and climb all the way to the top and reach a new area of the cathedral. And I don't know if I did the best job explaining it earlier, but phrasing it like level 1 and level 2, maybe I need to explain it a little bit more. Because I would still consider myself on level 2 of the cathedral, even though I just climbed some pipes like a staircase. So what do I mean by level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4 here? So basically, anytime I'm able to glide on an updraft being caused by a ventilation room or a collection of pipes to reach a new area of the cathedral that I could not possibly climb or jump to, that is what I would consider a new level of the cathedral. So on level 1 we managed to open up the vents in the ventilation room and glide on the updraft in order to reach level 2, which is where we currently are. So that draft is what I would consider the distinguishing factor for when a level ends and a new one begins. And right now everything I'm doing, including breaking those glass spheres, that is going to be in an effort to open up some more vents in a new ventilation room, and then I can use the updraft produced by it in order to glide up to the 3rd level. Speaking of my effort to open up that updraft in order to reach the 3rd level, you just saw me go into the spectral realm, pass through some bars, and then go into a room where I lifted up some lids, letting some whistling air escape from them. After I opened up the 2 lids closest to the bottom of the screen, at that point we got a cutscene showing one more of the glass spheres breaking. We now only have one more sphere left to break open, and that is going to require me to go back down the hallway back by the bars that we passed through in the spectral realm, only this time we are going to keep going down the hall until we reach another room similar to the one that we just saw. The last one had humans inside of it, this one is going to have spider vampires. This room is also going to have some lids inside of it, and I'm only going to be opening the top 2 lids, the ones furthest up the screen. Doing that is going to allow the whistling wind to hit a pitch that is going to break the very last of the glass spheres. And after you break the glass spheres, you really don't have to worry about opening the wrong lids anymore. You can open or close all of them if you want. You have already done what you need to access those weights that were inside the spheres, which are going to be the key for reaching the next area. Like whenever I went into the very first room with the humans in it, I opened the 2 lids I needed to in order to break that sphere, and then I went and opened an additional lid at the very end of the room. That last lid was completely unnecessary, but the sphere was already broken, so it really did not hurt anything. And alright, we are back in the material realm. I'm going over to where we saw the glass spheres breaking earlier. And like I mentioned earlier, every single time that we saw one of them breaking, it was revealed that there was a weight with handles inside of it. But even though we were seeing that, there really wasn't an explanation on what those were for. And as far as I can tell, those squared weights are going to act like magnetic locks. Whenever Raziel interacts with those, he is going to put his hands on the handles, struggle to lift them off the ground, and then rotate them to his left. And it seems like every single time he picks up one of those and rotates it to the left and then drops the weight, it seems like he is unlocking something. Because whenever all of them are rotated, it opens up the ventilation system, and then suddenly we have another updraft. Raziel can ride that with his wings all the way up to the 3rd level of the cathedral. The first thing you are going to notice whenever Raziel reaches that level is there is a pipework system in the walls. Segments of those pipes are going to be vertical, and you're going to need to push those into place, that way they complete the entire run of pipes. That is the first thing you are going to want to do, because without those pipes in place, we're not going to be able to create the updraft necessary to reach the 4th and final floor. If you skip over this, you might still be able to create something of a draft, but it's not going to be strong enough to get Raziel up to the final area. Alright, this is going to be the room with the 3 conjoined pipes that we are going to be using to create an updraft, which will then carry us up to the 4th level. Only right now there is no wind coming out of those pipes, so we are going to need to fix that. Now we need to open up a new pathway that's going to allow us to reach the remaining parts of the 3rd level. To do so, Raziel needs to move around some more magnetic locks, and rotating those is going to cause some massive blocks to move out of the way, revealing a new path. So I have Raziel climb up on top of the 3 conjoined pipes that we are going to be using later on. From there, he should be able to glide over to the new path that we just opened up. Once Raziel has reached that point, I go ahead and immediately shift into the spectral realm, and I look around for some souls to devour, but there are none to be found. I suppose the Slua may have beat me to it. Realizing that, I have Raziel go down the hall to find some bars to pass through, which is going to take us to a new room, and we're just going to try and find some more health in there. And in this room, whenever you are in the material realm, there is a very interesting mechanic that does not get used very much. In fact, it's not going to come up in this playthrough either, but I still want to bring it up. But in one of the earlier cutscenes when Raziel first entered the Silenced Cathedral, he was talking about there being a very specific hymn that the humans discovered. It was a hymn that would hit a pitch that was just high enough, or I guess just right in some way or another, that whenever it was played, it would kill vampires. And within this area, once you are done with all the puzzles and you connect all the pipes, and I believe once Raziel has the very next ability after he beats the next boss, Zephon, you can return to that room where we passed through the bars, and at the very top of those pipes, the ones on the opposite side of the room that we did not explore, and at the top of the pipes there are going to be some hatches you can open up, and if you do that, it's going to release the hymn that he was talking about, and it will kill any vampires in the room with you. As cool as that is, it will never come up again for the rest of the game, so it is kind of a one and done mechanic. But I still find it very interesting because the developers made a point to hint at it very early on, and it turns out there is at least one situation where you can use that. I think it is also a very cool detail that it has no effect on Raziel, because even though he used to be a vampire, he is now more of a wraith. I just thought that was kind of a neat detail that with his transition to being a new kind of creature, certain things like this just do not bother him. But enough about that, let's get back to what I'm actually doing right now. The main objective in this area is to find 3 circular handles. Whenever we turn one of those circular handles, it's going to release a flow of air through the pipe networks that's going to go all the way back to that conversion point where we saw the 3 pipes put together. The idea here is that we want to get all 3 of those pipes releasing air, so the airflow is going to be strong enough for Raziel to reach that 4th floor. Every time we turn one of these circular handles, it is going to break, and then we need to go find the other ones. Inside of this room, there is going to be one of those circular handles, and in order to access it, I had to pull a block out from underneath some rubble, and I really need to position that block directly underneath that handle, which is suspended high enough into the air where I cannot just reach it normally. But once that block is in place, I can jump on top of it, and then suddenly Raziel is at standing level with that handle and he can turn it. Once I was done with that, I shifted into the spectral realm so I could jump on top of the rubble without it moving, and now we are getting a glimpse at the next room. And there are no souls for me to devour in here, so I am going to have to backtrack to the Slua, but while I am doing that, I'll explain what's happening in here. This room is going to contain some vertical pipes that we need to push in place, kind of like what we did when we first entered the 3rd floor. Whenever we have those in place, we're going to be able to walk along the pipes like a pathway, and we are going to continue to ascend in this room until we eventually reach its circular handle. We are then going to turn that to get the airflow going again, and it can pass through that newly fully connected pipework that we just got done working with. It is mention worthy that sequentially this should be the very last circular handle, but I skipped the very first one. I decided to save it for last instead because I'm just going to backtrack through all of this area anyway, and I can grab it on my way out. And once we have that final handle taken care of, we can just glide up to the boss battle for this area. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. Raziel's back in the material realm, and now there are spider vampires that are going to try and get in his way as he tries to ascend these pipes and, push the vertical pipes into place. I'm really not going to bother trying to fight them this time around because they're just not really going to do a very good job of getting in the way. I can easily just run from them without them catching up, and if they jump onto the walls to try climbing up those to catch up to me, for whatever reason their programming is not the greatest when they do that, and more often than not if they jump back onto the walls, they will stop pursuing you and just hang out there for one reason or another. So they don't do a very good job of pursuing you vertically, but they do a great job of taking themselves out of the fight. And with 2 of the handles turned, it is time to start backtracking to the 3rd handle. While we backtrack, we are going to return to that pit where Raziel pulled a block out from underneath some rubble. We then went on to use that block as a key part of how we reached the handle, and now that we are back in the pit, we need to use that block one more time. This time around, we need to move it from where we positioned it previously, all the way over to the ledge that we cannot just jump up to exit this area. But when the block is in place, we can jump on top of the block, and then we should be able to reach that ledge from there. Also, I have to point out that despite all my early struggles against the spider vampires in the Silenced Cathedral, I just took those out without getting hit a single time, so yay! Also, back inside the room with the organ pipes that I mentioned could be used to kill the spider vampires later on when playing that hymn, Yeah, inside that room is going to be the final handle that we need to turn. We just have to jump all the way to the bottom of that room, and at the base of the pipes, we should be able to reach that third and final handle. So yeah, we just have to shift back into the material realm, very quickly turn that handle, and then go back into the spectral realm so we can pass through the bars and go back to the room with the conjoined pipes. From there, we are just one more shift back into the material realm away from gliding all the way up to the fourth and final floor and getting that boss battle. And from here, all I really need is just to not be hit by these spider vampires while I try to reach those pipes. Hopefully they comply and I don't have to deal with any more crap from them. Here we go, they land. They are slow and we jump out of the way. And I do manage to avoid getting hit by them. I make my ascension to those pipes and now we are able to glide up to that final level. And once we are up there, we do have a choice, I suppose. We can go face the boss, or I can go directly to the warp gate room and activate that, which is what I intend to do. Once I got closer to the boss, I began to realize it would really suck to have to go through all of that all over again, even with all the puzzles already solved. Like, if for any reason I had to quit the game and reload it, I would much rather just teleport all the way to the boss area. It was already bad enough that I got soft locked inside of Melchiah's territory and had to start the game all over again. If something similar were to happen here, it would suck much more. Especially considering the area that you have to go through to reach Zephon is either the most or the second most amount of time you are going to spend reaching a boss in this entire game. It's either Zephon or the final boss. And I think the only reason the final boss may be the longest is because there are some cutscenes with some dialogue in them along that path that take a long time to get through. We don't even have that excuse here, most of it is just solving puzzles. So I activate the warp gate and now I am finally ready. Let's go ahead and go into the next room, and hello Zephon, we have arrived.
There is no returning for you, Raziel.
Zephon, your visage becomes you. It's an appropriate reflection of your soul.
And you are not his handsome Raziel anymore. His precious firstborn son turned betrayer. You have missed so many changes, little Raziel. Look around you. See how the human's weapon of destruction has become my home. Indeed, my body. A cocoon of brick and granite from which to watch a pupating world.
A crevice in which to cower, only scuttling from the shadows to devour a victim already ensnared in your cowardly trap. But you've made the mistake of leaving me unbound, and it is you who must succumb to my will.
Will, instinct, reflex action. The insect mind finds little difference. I warn you, brother. As my stature has grown, so it is matched by my appetite. Step forward, morsel.
So we get to see the modern day version of Zephon, which, similar to his spider-like vampire children, he has become very bug-like. So when it comes to defeating Zephon, we want him to stab one of his legs into the ground trying to attack Raziel. When that happens, Raziel can then strike the leg. If he has the Soul Reaver, it takes 1 hit to destroy. If he has his claws, it's going to take 2 hits. Once a leg is destroyed, Zephon is going to scream out in pain, and he's also going to produce an egg. When that happens, Raziel needs to grab that egg and hop out of the way before Zephon can attack him. When that happens, Raziel needs to carry the egg all the way to the flamethrower in the back of the room, where some very heroic vampire hunter somehow made it all the way to Zephon before he died horrendously. Even so, in death, his flamethrower is still active, so very unlucky for him that he died, but very lucky for us that his weapon is still very useful, because we are going to use it to catch the egg on fire. We are then going to throw that flaming egg back at Zephon to hurt him, and we need to repeat that process a few more times to catch him on fire and defeat him. You are going to need to destroy 3 legs in order to get 3 eggs to throw at Zephon. That should be enough to beat him, although there is an achievement for destroying all 4 of his legs. I end up getting it in this playthrough, and we get to see that on the screen as well.
Zephon's apostate soul has bestowed on you a new gift. Like his vampire spawn, you are able to scale certain walls which are otherwise impassable, but only in the physical realm. In the spirit world, these insubstantial edifices will not support you.
That was useful information, but for one reason or another, the Elder God does not keep talking to us at the end of that cutscene, even though he has more to say. Instead, he wants us to walk like 10 more feet, and he's like, oh yeah, I forgot to mention this.
In the mountains beyond the pillars, Nosgoth's cataclysms have exposed an ancient crime. Endowed with Zephon's soul, you may now progress where your path was hitherto impeded.
Now that Zephon has been taken down, Raziel has the ability to climb certain walls. After getting that ability, I saved the game, quit the game, and then reloaded it because I wanted to get out of the Silenced Cathedral faster. Now we are back inside the Elder God's chamber again.
The canyons beyond the pillars expose an ancient blasphemy. Having devoured Zephon's soul, you may now gain entrance where your path was formerly blocked.
Similar to what I did whenever I beat Melchiah before, now that I have a new ability from defeating Zephon, I went around and I started collecting all the health emblems, the mana artifacts, as well as all the glyphs I could with this new ability. So you may notice a few differences in my overall health and some of the glyphs I have available to use in battle. Now I skipped over all of that to resume the main story elements of Soul Reaver, but if you're interested in how to get all these optional items, I do have videos covering all of that, and their links are going to be in the description. Anyway, in that cutscene, the Elder God basically had the exact same thing to say to Raziel that he told him immediately after beating Zephon, but just a little bit different. Since there was a little bit of a difference, I figured it would be worth showing. And now that we have that completed, we're going to the next area of the game. Our objective is to reach the Sarafan tomb. The major requirement to do that is to return to the Pillars of Nosgoth, which is where we are going now. The fastest route that I can think of to get there is using the warp gate to reach the Lake of the Dead, and then following that path all the way back to the Sanctuary of the Clans, getting inside of there, and then bam, we are back at the Pillars. And yeah, going from the Lake of the Dead back to the Sanctuary of the Clans is a pretty short walk. In fact, we're already basically there, so we should arrive where we need to be pretty quickly. But yeah, we are on the road to the Pillars of Nosgoth, and I am mostly going to be traveling in the Spectral Realm. That is because in Soul Reaver, while I did not realize it before, there is something of a day-night cycle happening in the background. The game starts off pretty bright, but as you progress at certain points like the one that we are currently in, the area outside can be very dark. At least in the material realm it is. However, whenever you shift into the Spectral Realm, things may go into a bluish-greenish tint, but it's also slightly brighter. And as far as I am aware, the day-night cycle does not apply to the spectral plane, so it's always going to be at least kind of consistently brighter than the material world. Kind of an odd choice for what's supposed to be the Underworld, but I will take the extra visibility, and I'm going to mostly be traveling in the spectral realm at times just to make things a little bit easier to see.
Like a corpse in a shallow grave, corruption rises to the surface. Beyond these pillars, the defiled victim mutely screams its outrage.
So between the Elder God and Ariel, what we are going to discover is being described as a crime, a corruption, a blasphemy, and just all kinds of other good stuff, so hopefully it lives up to the hype. But to reach the Sarafan tomb, the wall that we need to climb is right over here, and it is going to take us to a circular pathway at the very top of the throne room. And if you follow that path, you're eventually going to find a way out of there. It's going to be a hallway that leads to 2 different doors. It really does not matter which one you choose because they are going to lead to the same general area. I personally take the door to the right, and now that we are done interacting with that door or the walls or really anything else, I shift into the spectral realm just so I can get a little bit better visibility as I explore this new area. That is going to help me see a little bit while I try to reach our destination, although I am going to shift back into the material realm once I reach the Sarafan tomb, or right before I do so. I thought that the visibility was going to be pretty good for that cutscene, so it's kind of unfortunate that it's actually not, and I would have been better off just staying in the spectral realm to watch the cutscene, but that is not what occurs. So yeah, I kind of end up sacrificing visibility for no good reason.
The ancient tomb of the Sarafan, once impenetrably sealed, now ravaged by Nosgoth's upheavals, its mysteries lay exposed. In the time of Vorador, centuries before Kain was made, the Sarafan warrior priests waged a merciless war against the vampire tribes of Nosgoth. Emboldened by righteousness, they committed unspeakable and indiscriminate acts of violence, massacring fledglings and ancients alike. They decimated entire bloodlines in mere decades. Now their husks lay here, murderers enshrined.
So that cutscene does a really good job of explaining who these Sarafan were, how they were vampire murdering crusaders, which is really useful if you did not play the previous game. Raziel also name drops Vorador, but does not bother explaining who he is, and he's also not going to get referenced or seen for the rest of this game either, so I'm going to pick up the slack and try explaining that character real quick. In the previous game Blood Omen, Vorador was basically an elder vampire who notoriously killed the majority of the Guardians back during the time of the Sarafan. Vorador would go on to live for hundreds of more years until the time when Ariel was murdered, the pillars got corrupted, and then Kain went around killing all the Guardians to try and purify them. And during that quest, Vorador becomes especially helpful in trying to kill off the Conflict Guardian Malik, who himself was part of the Sarafan and had the duty of protecting the Circle of Nine, all 9 Guardians. But since he failed to protect them from Vorador the first time around, he was punished by having his soul basically tethered to some armor and a weapon.
Take heed, Raziel. A forgotten history lies within. Know thyself, though it may destroy you.
Without a real body, Kain could not kill Malik. Kain instead sought out Vorador for some help, and it turns out Vorador did have a trick up his sleeve for winning that fight. Vorador defeats Malik on Kain's behalf, and Kain went on with his quest, which he eventually kind of sort of failed when he chose not to sacrifice himself, and well, here we are. But what happened to Vorador? Well, through some shenanigans, Kain went back in time to try preventing a tyrant from taking over all of Nosgoth by killing him whenever he was young. But while that was successful in preventing him from becoming a tyrant, it also made him a martyr for anyone who hated vampires because a vampire just killed their ruler. So we then fast forward to the present where everything was screwed up because it caused a vampire killing movement that left Kain and Vorador as the last surviving vampires. Vorador went on to get executed by the Time Guardian Moebius, and with Kain as the last remaining vampire, they were nearly extinct and would have gone extinct had he sacrificed himself to save the pillars, but he did not do so. Which is why we are in the situation we are currently in, and that's why Vorador was important to Blood Omen.
As I pulled the stone free, a sigh of sepulchral air escaped the inner chamber. I was not prepared for what lay beyond this threshold. These crypts, defiled caskets of Sarafan saints, bearing my brothers' names, and my own. The irony of Kain's blasphemous act rushed in on me with the crushing force of revelation. Were my hands not as bloody as these? Worse, I had spilled the blood of my brothers, these very comrades whose tombs lay ravaged before me.
Yes, Raziel, you were Sarafan, born of the same force that all but destroyed your race. Before the dawn of the Empire, you were chosen. Kain, Nosgoth's solitary self-declared monarch, plundered this tomb and raised you from these crypts. Breathing his vampiric gift into your defiled corpses, he resurrected you as his favored sons.
I mentioned that Malik the Conflict Guardian was killed by Kain with the assistance of Vorador. Well, he is buried here too, and I find it interesting he is the only person in the Sarafan tomb that Kain did not resurrect to be one of his lieutenants. And it makes sense he would not try resurrecting Malik because he had directly fought against Malik and helped in killing him alongside Vorador. Bringing him back from the dead probably would have been very risky. Then again, because Malik was cursed, he did not have a traditional body to work with, and that may have made resurrecting him a little bit tricky. So maybe risk wasn't the reason behind that decision making, maybe it was just I don't really want to deal with trying to figure out how to do this.
Heretic, you shall not pass.
Such loyalty to one who has you guarding this outpost like a chained dog. Do you prosper on the scraps he casts you?
Your insults will do nothing to blunt the agonies of your demise.
Kain killed me once. Behold the result. I have no more to fear from you.
This fight should be super easy if you have the Force Glyph. You just need your enemy to be close to the edge, then you can activate the Force Glyph and you're going to knock him into the water. Okay, oddly that did not work out for me. I mean, he was towards the middle of the platform when I did that the last time, so maybe if I have him closer to the edge it'll work out better. Well, okay, normally this works out pretty easily, but that's fine. We're just going to go ahead and do this the old-fashioned way, I guess beat the crap out of him and then throw him into the water way. And okay, perfect. I stun him with just a little bit of health remaining, so I'm not going to die. Let's throw him into the water and get this fight over with.
Manipulate space. As your symbiotic weapon, the Soul Reaver is also thus enhanced. You may focus and project an orb of kinetic energy to strike objects that are otherwise beyond your reach.
Alright, that mini-boss was a vampire in Terrell's clan, Terrell being one of the other lieutenants and brothers of Raziel. He's also buried in this tomb, and we'll also find more of his vampires within this tomb if we look around enough, but other than that, I really don't have too much to say about them. They are going to come up again towards the end of the game, and I'll talk about them then, but for right now, I would rather talk about the ability that we just picked up. So after getting that artifact, we now have the ability to use telekinetic projectiles, which I would consider the most useful ability in the game. Utility-wise, we can just knock around objects with it, that's pretty straightforward. Where it is the most useful is going to be how it can be applied to combat. Rather than going up and fighting people directly from this point forward, I'm usually going to resort to just throwing projectiles at them. There are two ways that we can use the projectiles in combat. The less useful way is to manually line up our shots, which is a little bit slower, or we can rely on the auto-aim to just go ahead and line up our shots for us, which allows us to just very rapidly fire at the opponent over and over again. And I do mean rapidly because there is almost no recovery time after you use a projectile with the auto-aim. So you can basically non-stop rapidly fire at your opponents until they are knocked into a stun state, and in some cases that's even faster if you knock them into walls because it automatically puts them into a stun state, or you could knock them into spikes, fire, water. So yeah, from this point forward, I would consider the telekinetic projectiles the very best weapon available to you. In every single fight with the exception of boss battles, it is going to be my go-to option to rapidly get through opponents if I choose to fight them at all. The only negative thing I could think of whenever it comes to the telekinetic projectiles is that you use them with the triangle button, which is the same button you use whenever you're trying to execute an enemy. So if you are too close to your opponent when trying to use the telekinetic projectiles, sometimes you can accidentally use the executions instead, which will not work if the enemy is not stunned and leaves you open for a free hit. And then you lose the Soul Reaver if you take damage, and yeah. So yeah, that can be a bit of a negative aspect to the projectiles, but even then it's just because of button placement, not really because there's anything wrong with the projectiles themselves. And yeah, being able to rapidly fire these with really no negative ramifications to it, it almost feels overpowered, and it always feels like the very best option available to you. And what is really funny about that is that this isn't even the best version of the projectiles. You can make them even better in this game if you seek out an optional upgrade to the Soul Reaver, which is something that I'm going to do immediately after the very next boss battle. So we just got this, and still we are already really close to making it somehow even better. That is going to make hand-to-hand combat almost non-existent for the rest of the playthrough, because I would much rather just rapidly kill my opponents with the projectiles or just run away from them entirely. Since I'm trying to beat this game relatively quickly, there's really just not any good excuse for any more hand-to-hand combat, unless it becomes absolutely necessary. But again, that's only going to apply to the common vampires, because whenever it comes to the boss battles, the telekinesis is almost completely useless with the exception of one battle. Everything else though is going to get bombarded by projectiles whenever I have the chance. Anyway, enough ranting about the new ability, let's focus on the objective at hand, because we now find ourselves in a new area that is covered almost entirely in water. We saw that when using a boat to cross a river that would otherwise be unpassable, and we are about to see that in a new area as well, where almost everything has been flooded. This area is going to be the Drowned Abbey, the territory of Raziel's brother Rahab. And with a new brother to go after, that means Ariel is going to have some new advice for us as well. I'm going to make use of the warp gate to return to the pillars for just a moment, because I want to hear all the unique things that Ariel has to say in this game, one because it's an achievement, and two because it's just really good for the world building.
North of the Sarafan tomb, a desecrated abbey languishes, half drowned.
I have to admit, what Ariel had to say really was not all that significant, and if I wasn't trying to get an achievement, I probably would not have backtracked just to hear it. But that was her unique dialogue, and while we are at it, let's go ahead and backtrack to the Underworld and see what the Elder God has to say as well.
North of the Sarafan tomb, your brother Rahab has secluded himself and his progeny in the ruins of a half-drowned abbey.
Okay, the Elder God really did not have anything too significant to say either, but we have heard it, and now we're good to resume the main mission. We are returning to the Drowned Abbey, and we are resuming our quest to go find Rahab, kill him, and get his ability. And I'm starting off back in the same warp gate room that I was in before, the main one for Rahab's territory. I'm going to exit there and return to a larger room that acts as an intersection between the warp gate and the main Drowned Abbey area. So I am going to go down the hallway that leads to the Drowned Abbey. There is going to be a sealed door at the very end of it, but using the Soul Reaver we can shoot it with a telekinetic projectile and it is going to open for us. Now I believe you can only open the door using the telekinesis from the Soul Reaver, but I could be mistaken.
Once a sanctuary against the vampire menace, this abbey has been drowned by the deluge spilling from this wounded land. Your brother Rahab and his brood, devastated even by the feeble rays of Nosgoth's sun, overcame their vulnerability to water and retreated from the surface. Now they haunt these ruins and glide in the darkness of its stagnant depths.
We are now at the Drowned Abbey, the new area to explore, which is going to come with some new unique vampires. So these vampires are going to be Rahab's offspring, and their variation is going to be very fish-like, and they're going to have shark-like jaws, so I'm just going to call them the shark vampires. At times we can see these vampires swimming around in the water, but some of them are going to be on the surface as well. And they are going to be ready to attack and hunt Raziel as he passes by. The ones in the water can pounce out and attack Raziel, and the ones on the surface, they can use water-like projectiles whenever they see Raziel advancing. So be on the lookout for those projectiles so you can jump out of the way, run out of the way, or use your own telekinesis to block those projectiles. Or be like me and beat them to the punch using your telekinesis to knock them into hazards on the wall like those spikes. Now these are the only vampires I am aware of that are completely unbothered by the water. So we are going to have one less way of killing these vampires. That also means that we have two major things that are going to be a danger to Raziel. That's going to be the vampires and the water itself. There's actually a trophy that you can earn if you get through this entire area without falling into the water a single time. And very specifically falling into the water. You can still shift into the spectral realm and then jump into the water, and that's not going to count against you. Now I already have that trophy, so I'm not going to be going for it in this video, but still, gee whiz. But if I still needed to get that trophy, you would see me traveling in the spectral realm a lot more because there's less of a risk of me falling into the water. But whenever traveling around the drowned abbey, there are going to be walls that you have to climb or windows that you have to break, so you cannot stay in the spectral realm the entire time, but that still can help you out a little bit. But still, you can cover a lot of this area in the spectral realm, so it's still pretty helpful. Like, even doors in this area are not really much of an obstacle because they are barred doors, which means that you can use Melchiah's ability to just pass through them whenever you're in the spectral realm. So if not for those walls that we need to climb or that window that we have to break, you could almost get through the entire area in the spectral realm, but it just does not quite work out that way. And if you do end up going for that achievement, the trophy is going to unlock whenever you reach the bell tower, and from there you are able to make any mistake that you want and fall into the water if you have to because you already have the trophy. I bring that up because the boss battle is going to be one that kind of revolves around you trying to avoid falling into the water. Or at least I think it was intended to be, because you can definitely beat that boss battle standing in one location. Even so, you can still definitely fall into the water on accident in the boss battle against Rahab, so it is kind of nice that they give you the trophy just before that happens. So you will not be missing out on that trophy if you manage to get through the entire area flawlessly, only to accidentally fall into the water at the last possible moment during that fight with Rahab. And okay, now I am in an area where Raziel needs to shift back into the material realm, because there are going to be some walls that he needs to climb. And it is also around here that I end up making a mistake, and I believe I end up falling into the water. Because even though I did get this achievement previously, I was still trying to replicate the results where I was getting through the entire area flawlessly without falling into the water, just to kind of show what that looks like. And of course I messed that up, and we do not get to see that here today. Not to worry though, this mistake is only going to be a momentary delay. It really does not cost me too much time, and then I get right back on track to finding Rahab. And okay, here comes the mistake. I needed to cross these beams in order to reach a hallway across the room. I tried gliding all the way to the second beam instead of just going for the first one, and whenever I was trying to make that glide, it turns out it was too far away. I was not going to be able to reach that second beam, and then down Raziel goes into the water. The water burns away at him until he goes into the spectral realm again, and now I need to try that one more time. So now Raziel is definitely regretting being stuck with some of those vampiric weaknesses, like, water being acidic, but he is not going to let that hold him back. He gets back onto the platforms, he heals up, goes back into the material world, and just like that we are right back to another attempt. So like I said, not much of a time loss there, just a momentary inconvenience. And on the topic of time, getting through the drowned abbey is actually a really fast process, especially if you already know where to go. In fact, if you look at the overall time in the game, if you were to combine the amount of time it takes you to get through the Sarafan tomb and the drowned abbey, it is still going to be a shorter amount of time than it took you to get through the entire silenced cathedral. Like, I think it only takes me about 20 minutes from the moment that I wake up in the Elder God's chamber to go all the way through the entire Sarafan tomb portion of the game, go through the entire drowned abbey portion of the game, and then fight Rahab and win. Whereas I think it took me about an hour to get through the entire silenced cathedral and then beat Zephon. But alright, I have managed to get by that point where I screwed up and fell into the water. After that, I just needed to avoid some shark vampires, go break a stained glass window, and then it was time to jump across some platforms and again avoid falling into the water. That is going to lead us to the roof of the Abbey, and from there I should be able to glide across the water and reach the bell tower. Time to ring the bell and say hello to Rahab. Alright, now the door is open, but the door is beneath the water, so that means it is time to go back into the spectral realm. Beyond those doors is going to be the main room for the drowned abbey, and whenever we return back into the material realm, that is where we are going to find Rahab. Raziel is just going to need to climb up some columns, which their length is going to be different depending on whether or not you are in the material world or the spectral realm. They are staggered and you can use them as a staircase in the spectral realm, but whenever we return to the material world, they are all the same height just above the water. So the entire boss fight is going to take place with us just teetering on the verge of falling into the H2O instant death hazard, and we are going to have to navigate around that the entire time we fight against Rahab. And once Raziel is just above the height of the water and back in the material world, that is where he is going to have a conversation with Rahab.
You have adapted well to your environment, for one so maladjusted.
Do not mock me, Raziel. You of all of us should respect the power bestowed by a limitation overcome. Kain said you would come.
You speak with the murderer?
You would do well to mind your blasphemous tongue.
What more did he tell you?
That you would destroy me.
I will indeed. But tell me, before I tear your soul from its moorings, do you know what we were before Kain spawned us?
Human.
Sarafan, Rahab, the antithesis of all we ever believed.
Does it matter? We were lost. He saved us.
Saved us? From what?
From ourselves.
Begin the boss battle with Rahab, and this one is going to be very simple. In fact, it is going to be the easiest boss fight in the entire game, which is appropriate for the boss in the shortest area in the entire game. Kind of weird that they saved that for the middle boss, but sure, why not? We're gonna run with that. So stay on the platform out of the water, and then around the room there are going to be these windows that you can shoot with your telekinetic ability. And once you break all the stained glass windows around the room, sunlight is going to flood into the room. It's going to hit the reflective surface in the very middle of the room, and that is going to fry Rahab.
To water's touch. Immersion in water will no longer dissolve your physical body, enabling you to swim to areas heretofore beyond your reach.
Before I progress in the game, I wanted to stop and show you something that I thought was very funny, and it is something I would not have noticed had I not been editing this video. I have it playing in the background, but Raziel was pulling off some exorcist shit and I did not realize it. During that scene with Rahab, Raziel was turning around, but when he did so, his body turned one way and his head turned the other. So, in order to talk to Rahab, he was pulling off some neck-breaking physics, and I kind of love it. Let it be known that even owls are envious of Raziel. Anyway, we just defeated Rahab, and now we can swim through the water without it killing us. And I could just save, quit, and respawn back in the Elder God's chamber right now, but instead, I think I'm going to take a moment to show some optional things that you might miss if you just stuck to the main story elements of this game. And this could be a good opportunity to show exactly how to get out of the drowned Abbey without saving and quitting, because how to do so is not as easy as just backtracking like all the other locations.
Beyond the maelstrom of the abyss, a subterranean tunnel leads northward to the clan territory of your brother Dumah. Endowed with Rahab's soul, you may swim to gain entry where your progress was previously impeded.
The first thing I'm going to show is where to find the Fire Reaver upgrade, which is the easiest to get right after you beat Rahab. The other thing I'm going to show is exactly how to get out of the drowned Abbey, because it's not as easy as the other locations. In the other locations, I could just go back out the same way I entered the area. With the drowned Abbey, there was that door that we had to open with telekinesis though, and that only works on one side of the door. So we are not going to be able to use that same door to get out of here. But there is going to be another way. And if you don't already know where that exit is, it's kind of tricky to find. So I'm going to go ahead and show that just in case for some reason you're not able to just save, quit the game, and then reload the game and re-enter the Elder God's chamber. After that, I'm going to show one more optional thing that's going to be pretty close to where Raziel ends up surfacing whenever he does leave this area. And that is going to be how exactly to reach the Human Citadel. So if you are not interested in seeing me going after these optional things, you may want to skip ahead a little bit in the video. Because once I am done doing all of this, I am going to be going after the very next boss in the game, and that is going to be Dumah. But if you are interested in seeing me go after these optional items as well, feel free to stick around and enjoy the journey. So I backtracked to that room where I accidentally fell into the water earlier, only now Raziel can swim and he's going to stay in the material world where he can interact with physical objects. That's important because I'm going to use his telekinesis to break a stained glass window that was beneath the water, and that's going to reveal a new path that we can swim through. With that broken, Raziel can swim down a set of stairs, and at the very bottom of that set of stairs is going to be another set of stairs. So I am going to have Raziel swim all the way to the bottom of that, and once he reaches the bottom, there is going to be another stained glass window, and it's going to have the image of the Soul Reaver on it. I have Raziel use his telekinesis one more time to break that one open, and that is going to take us to a hidden room that's going to have a fiery forge in it, and that's going to be the way that we unlock the Fire Reaver.
May be imbued with fire at any future time.
And alright, the same area where I went to find the Fire Reaver is basically going to be the exact same area that I used to exit the drowned Abbey. And whenever I backtrack to the water, you are going to notice that the Fire Reaver does not stick around whenever it makes contact with water. Not to worry though, you can get the Fire Reaver back at any major fire source throughout the game, which is basically anything with fire that is not a torch. You know, the ones that Raziel can use as a weapon. So I have Raziel swim all the way up one of these sets of stairs that he swam down earlier. And after swimming up one of those sets of stairs, I have Raziel swim to the right. That is where there is going to be a nesting room where a bunch of these shark vampires are hatching out of pods. And they can bust out at any moment. To my knowledge, you cannot kill these shark vampires whenever you are underwater. At most, you can stun them using your telekinesis. That in mind, I'm not going to try fighting them in any way, I'm just going to keep swimming. Also inside of that nesting room is going to be a small chamber that Raziel can swim through. So I have Raziel go that direction and tell himself just keep swimming, and eventually he is going to find himself back inside of his old territory. As you might recall, some of Raziel's territory was underwater, and that's because it turns out it connects to the drowned Abbey. And that is how we end up exiting that area and returning to Raziel's territory. Also inside of this area that's still submerged with water is going to be where you can access the puzzle for the fire glyph. I'm not going to be doing anything with that in this video, but I wanted to point that out. If you are curious about how to get the fire glyph though, I do have a video covering how to get all of the glyphs including that one. But yeah, everything is going to start looking very familiar here in a moment, especially once Raziel is out of the water, because we are very close to that same area where Raziel was ambushed at the very beginning of the game. That's going to be the same area that whenever Raziel returned to his territory and tried investigating what happened to his clan, the gates closed behind him and Dumah's vampires started to attack him. But yeah, we are around that area. In fact, here we are. And also very close to this area is going to be the Lake of the Dead. That is the destination I am going to because that's going to be the main connecting point for how we eventually reach the Human Citadel. Earlier, we got instructions from the Elder God to return to the Lake of the Dead, that way we could jump across it and then swim through the water that we couldn't get through earlier. And there is going to be a path that we can use to reach Dumah's territory. But directly beside that access point is actually going to be another path. If you were to go to the left instead of going straight, you would notice that there is another point that Raziel can climb up to. And that is going to allow us to explore an entirely different area. That completely different area is going to be exactly where the Human Citadel is going to be located. Like I mentioned earlier, we are taking the left option. Now, one interesting thing about the Human Citadel is that it's easiest to reach whenever you are able to swim, but swimming is not required to reach that location. Funny enough, it's actually available to Raziel from the very first time he returns to the Lake of the Dead after being resurrected. You do not need any of the abilities from any of the bosses in order to make this happen. However, if you do not get any of the boss abilities before going to the Human Citadel, you're not really going to be able to do much. Like at most, you can activate the warp gate, but I think that's about it. Now there are going to be a bunch of optional items that you can get inside of the Human Citadel, but those are only available to Raziel as he continues to get more abilities. But even at the point whenever Raziel's only ability is basically shifting in between the physical and spectral realms, that's really all he needs in order to access this area for the very first time. From here I just stack some blocks on top of each other to create a platform I could use to reach a higher area, and hello Human Citadel.
The Human Citadel, its towering walls and deep moats engineered to keep Nosgoth's vampire plague at bay. Though the city was well fortified against vampires, its human architects hadn't considered a breach by a creature such as myself.
Now that we are well within the human civilization within the Citadel, I'm going to make my way over to the Warp Gate room, that way we can activate that. And that is basically going to be my stopping point for this area, because the only other things worth exploring in this area lead to optional items that I've already covered how to get in other videos. Now, besides the optional items, there are some other things you can do within this area, like for instance, there are some trophies that you can only get within the Human Citadel. But besides that and the optional items, there's really nothing else going on in this area. There's especially nothing really story related going on. And even though I have gone on a little bit of a detour, this playthrough is mostly to highlight the story elements of Soul Reaver. So I am going to be wrapping up my trip around the human civilization and start making my way back to that kind of a playthrough, just focusing on the main story. But yeah, besides this being an area that has a bunch of optional items, really just in general, this area is optional all by itself, because nothing story related ever happens in this location. So you can very easily go the entire game playing through from start to finish and completely miss this location. Unless you are just really looking for all the optional stuff this game has to offer, there's nothing really incentivizing you to come check it out. Although I will say, if you choose to visit this location, it's a lot easier to move around if you have not been killing any humans. Because going back to some stuff I was talking about earlier, if you exclusively kill vampires and do not kill any humans, the humans are going to worship Raziel. So they will not get in your way at all as you walk around their civilization. But if you were killing humans up to this point, they might be hostile towards you and slightly get in your way. Granted, they are not going to put up much of a fight, but still they will be a little bit of a nuisance, just a tiny bit of an inconvenience. And okay, before we become too invested in going after Dumah, let's go ahead and see what Ariel and the Elder God have to say, starting with Ariel.
Beyond the cliffs that witnessed your execution, a silent city sits in frozen tableau. Locked in eternal limbo, they await redemption or release.
Alright, those were the hints and clues that Ariel had to give us. Let's go ahead and see what the Elder God has to say. Let's return to the Underworld.
Centuries past, your brother Dumah retreated with his clan into Nosgoth's northern wilderness. Empowered by the gift of Rahab's soul, seek out his mountain stronghold. But tread carefully. These frozen wastes have mysteries yet to disclose.
Okay, that is going to be all the additional information that Raziel can get from the Elder God and Ariel. Now it is time to get back on track and go after our next target, which, as they alluded to, is going to be Dumah. That is going to be the fourth of 5 different lieutenants that Raziel considered brothers. And because of the way this game is structured, even though there is one more brother after Dumah that Raziel has not killed yet, Dumah is actually going to be the very last one that we go after. The 5th and final brother, Terrell, actually does not make an appearance in this game. He was originally intended to be in the game, but unfortunately he was cut. In fact, there were plenty of other ideas, enemies, and locations that ultimately did not end up making it into Soul Reaver, even though they were planned. Terrell is just one of many of those, and that's one of the interesting things about this remaster. There is a bunch of additional content, especially for this first Soul Reaver game. And some of the most interesting features this remaster has is giving the player access to some of those locations and enemies that did not make the cut. Some of the cut content was brought back as bonus features in this game, and the player has the option of going and interacting with that and checking out those locations and enemies. They are not complete enough for you to see everything that would have happened, considering they are cut down quite a bit since they did not make the final cut, but you still get to explore it a little bit. Among all of that is the boss version of Terrell. You can get to see what he looks like, and you can also see what the arena looks like that you would have fought him in. As cool as that cut content is though, Terrell does not make any official appearances in the Soul Reaver game. Although he would return eventually in the very last game of the series, Legacy of Kain Defiance. So after Raziel was playable in 3 different games, he finally got revenge against the final brother. But I think I have said enough about what could have been and what will eventually be in future games. Let's go ahead and focus on the objective at hand, and that's going to be going after Dumah. And in order to reach Dumah's territory, Raziel had to cross the Lake of the Dead, and then he had to take a quick swim on the opposite side of the lake. On the opposite side of the lake, there are 2 ledges that Raziel can go to, one of which goes to the Human Citadel like I showed earlier, but the other one leads to Dumah's territory. which is going to be this snowy region here, and over there are these large walls that are blocking the way to his fortress. But to get to this point, as far as I am aware, there is no way for Raziel to glide all the way to that ledge back at the Lake of the Dead. You have to be able to swim. And after he has that ability, Raziel can take some inspiration from great white sharks, and he's going to do a Polaris breach in order to reach that cliff, pull himself up, and then reach the snowy region of Dumah's territory. But yeah, Raziel is going to need to find a way over the walls that are blocking our path and preventing us from reaching Dumah's fortress. But I'm not doing that immediately. First, I am exploring the neighboring area. There is not too much we can do around here just yet, but there are a bunch of Dumah's clan's vampires just lingering around. And if you travel down this path far enough, you are eventually going to reach another fortress-like area, where there seems to be some kind of a sundial built into the middle of this plain. There is nothing we can do with that right now, but eventually we are going to be returning, and this is going to be the key to reaching the final area of the game. But this is an area that we cannot open yet, and first we are going to have to go find Dumah. So now I am backtracking to the fortress walls that we're going to eventually have to cross, which that is going to be on one side of a field, and on the opposite side is going to be the warp gate room. I'm going to take a moment to activate that warp gate, that way if I for some reason have anything catastrophic happen, I can just teleport all the way back to this location, which that warp gate is going to be the closest one to the next boss battle. So having it unlocked in case of emergency or just to reach the very next area more quickly, it should end up being pretty useful. And okay, here we are, and we also set every vampire along the path on fire, that way whenever we are done here in the warp gate room that I'm now activating, we can go all the way to that point where I'm going to be able to glide over the walls to Dumah's fortress without running into any sort of enemy opposition. And alright, that's active now, so let's go ahead and start infiltrating that area. So we are going to return to the snowy field, pass by the vampire corpses, and towards the middle of the field, there are going to be these columns or pillars that Raziel can climb on top of. At the very top is going to be some kind of a bridge area, but more importantly, it's going to be just high enough to where Raziel can jump off and glide across the field, and he is going to make it on top of the fortress walls. So now we have successfully infiltrated Dumah's fortress, but we are not the first ones to do so.
This city once teemed with the life of my kind. Could it be that other clans had suffered the same fate as mine? In his madness, could Kain spare none of his brood?
It was not Kain, but Dumah's own arrogance that brought the downfall of his clan. These are human weapons, Raziel. Believing themselves invincible, Dumah and his offspring failed to see an attack coming from the least likely assailants. Complacent in their arrogance, they were taken by surprise, allowing the human vampire hunters to decimate their ranks with little resistance. The few that escaped have been reduced to scavengers.
And this provides something of an explanation for why Dumah's clan's vampires have been by far the most common ones all throughout Nosgoth, because whenever the human vampire hunters infiltrated and basically decimated all of their ranks, they were kind of forced to flee and take home in whatever areas in Nosgoth they could. So now they are pretty widespread and pretty common, and Raziel has been killing them just everywhere. And within Dumah's fortress, I have Raziel go through the gates and get deeper into the city. And I'm going to go ahead and highlight this area over here where we need to lower a drawbridge. This is going to be one of a few different puzzles that we are going to need to solve in order to just reach Dumah and also ultimately to defeat him. There is not much we can do on this side of the fortress, not yet anyway, but I do want to show you where we are going to ultimately end up. I have Raziel jump down to the bottom of where that drawbridge is eventually going to be lowered. Melchiah's gift lets Raziel pass through the bar since we are still in the spectral realm. On the other side was a wraith that Raziel just went ahead and rapid fire telekinetic blasted to death. And then we have Raziel press on to a small little area that looks like a town or a fortress square. In the middle of the square is going to be a spire, and there's also going to be a gate that we cannot pass through. Beyond that gate is going to be Dumah's throne room. The fight with Dumah is only going to initiate once we are inside that throne room. But just reaching our next boss is only going to be one part of the puzzle. There are other puzzles that we need to solve, and all those are going to be contributing to how we defeat Dumah. And that is going to be something I set up in advance. And that was a courtyard that has a statue of Dumah in the middle of it. Later on you could return to that courtyard and we can open up some optional areas which contain some optional items. I'm not going to be doing that in this playthrough since the main plan here is to stick to the main story elements, but still I wanted to point that out. just in case perhaps you want to go explore these optional areas or get these optional items. Now you know they are there. Although if that is something you are interested in, I do recommend waiting until you have already beaten Dumah, because his ability is going to be the way that you unlock these optional areas and you're able to go explore them and get those optional items. Without it, you are basically just going to be checking out his statue. But okay, enough showing that optional area and showing where we are ultimately going to need to end up. Let's go ahead and focus on getting that area opened up, and also focus on trying to figure out how we are going to kill Dumah. So what are the puzzles and what are we going to need to do in order to make that happen? The first thing that you really need to focus on is getting Raziel back into the material world, which is not something that you have to wander around too much to do. Going back to how we entered this area to begin with, we had Raziel fly over the wall and then go through a double door. Beyond that door we had a cutscene, then we had Raziel go into the spectral realm. And then we had him pass through a couple of gates. And beyond those gates was a completely caged off center portion of a room. On the opposite side of that sealed off area is a rift that Raziel can use to get back into the material world. I had Raziel do that, and beyond that cell there is a block in the middle of it that we could push around using our telekinesis. I did that until the block was completely against the wall closest to the entrance. Once that was done, I had Raziel go into the spectral realm. I had him pass through the bars. Then I had him hop onto the block and then jump up to the second floor, where there was a rift waiting for us and allowing us to shift back into the material world. Now that we are back in the material realm and also on the second floor, we have the option of jumping between the gates that we previously had to pass through in the spectral realm. I jump down there and I follow the hall all the way to the end, where there is a block I can pull out of the wall. Using that, I position it so that I can jump up to another second floor area that's going to allow us to glide over the cutscene courtyard that we were in earlier. And you should be able to reach a passageway on the other side. The passageway is going to lead us all the way to the next room that we're going to have to solve a puzzle in, and it's going to be a very large room with two different pools of water. We can see vampire corpses and blocks inside those pools of water, and now it's time to begin the next puzzle. Pulling that lever is going to drain the water from the two pools, but the vampires that were dead inside those pools, they will come back to life because they are no longer exposed to the substance that killed them. That is going to give us some adversaries to briefly have to deal with, but there are also going to be some items in these pools that we're going to need to use to solve the puzzle. Now, it does not really matter which pool you decide to start in, but I'm personally going to start in the pool that is the furthest away from the hallway that was our entrance into this area. And within that pool are going to be two different blocks. I immediately start moving one of those blocks to the median area that separates the two pools. Once that is all the way up against the wall, I start moving to the other block, and I start dragging it towards the first block. And that is because I need to stack this block on top of the other one. Stacking them on top of each other is not going to do anything major right now, but that is all I'm going to need to do in this pool, and then I can move on to the other one. And yeah, once I have these two blocks stacked on top of each other, I'm going to be free to move on to the other pool and start doing something very similar. Once I find myself inside of the pool that is the closest to the hallway that allowed us to enter this area, we are going to see 4 blocks, basically one in each corner. 3 of these blocks are going to be movable, and one of them is going to be stationary. So I start by moving all 3 of the movable blocks towards the one that is stationary. And the objective here is to use that stationary block as a way of stacking the blocks on top of each other until I can eventually stack them onto the median that separates the two pools. My main goal here is to get 2 blocks onto the median, that way I can use them in the other pool in combination with the other blocks that we have already been moving around. One of the ways we are going to use these additional blocks is I want to push one of them on top of the stack of 2 blocks that we've already put together in the other pool. And once we have that stack of 3, I'm going to be moving that all the way against the wall on the opposite side of that pool. If we were to look up, we could see a ledge that we are trying to reach, and we're going to need that stack of 3 in order to get up there. And we are going to need to get up there because that's going to be the pathway that we need to use in order to reach the incinerator or the furnace. But once we have that stack of 3 blocks, you're probably going to notice that Raziel cannot jump that high. But if he were to be able to get on top of that stack of 3 blocks, that is high enough for him to reach that ledge. That is where the additional block is going to come into play that we left on the median, because I said we were going to need 2 of them. So we go back to the median, and we're going to push that block into the pool, and we're going to adjust it to where it's in line with the stack of 3. Then Raziel can jump onto that single block, and with just that additional little bit of height, Raziel is then going to be able to jump onto the stack of 3 blocks, and then he can continue to leapfrog on them until he eventually reaches the hallway ledge. And after we get done doing all of that, we are going to be able to finally reach that incinerator or that furnace, just whatever you want to call it. And that's going to be very important because it's going to be a key component for how we're going to eventually reach Dumah, but it's also going to be the main way that we end up defeating him as well. And okay, it is time for the plan to come together. You just saw me do a test jump and see if Raziel can reach the top of the stack of 3 blocks. He cannot, so I return to the median so I can start moving around that single block. Once I am up there, I push it into the pool and I start moving it all by itself until it's eventually right up against the stack of 3 blocks. And it does not have to be right up against the blocks, it can actually be a little bit further away, and once it is close enough, I have Raziel climb on top of the single block. He then jumps onto the stack of 3, and then he can jump onto the ledge and pull himself up, and now we are going to be able to access the incinerator. And finally, after spending way too much time in the pool, we have finally made it to the hallway up on the ledge, and we can go into the incinerator room where there is going to be at least one more vampire for us to kill. There might be more, can't remember. But yeah, we are going to go in there and we're going to start prepping the incinerator, pulling some levers, starting up some gas, all that good stuff. The main reason we are going to be doing that for right now is to blow a hole through the wall that's going to allow us to access other parts of this fortress. But even after we get done doing that, I'm going to prep it again, that way we can use it as a true weapon against the next boss in the game. And I take a moment to find the one vampire I am certain is in this room. It takes me a moment to find him. I have to jump around and kind of look around just a little bit. And while I am dealing with that, to weaponize the furnace, you need to find a wheel on the wall, and then you need to turn it. That is going to activate the gas in this area. And after you get done doing that, you need to go over to a lever and you're going to pull that, and it's going to ignite the gas. And whenever that gas ignites, we're going to have a huge explosion of fire, and the concussion is powerful enough to blow a hole through the wall. And you can only imagine what that might do to, say, a really powerful vampire that we want revenge against. Alright, with that explosion there is now a hole in the wall, and we can use that to get back into the main area where there was previously a cell in the middle of the room, where I used my telekinesis to move around a block that was inside of that cell. Before I end up going to that area though, I do go back over to the wheel and turn it one more time, getting the gas running again. That is just me trying to prep it for later, which I think is going to save me one extra step. And now I have Raziel travel down that hallway through the hole in the wall that was made courtesy of that gas explosion. Like I mentioned before, that hallway leads all the way back to the cell room. And here is where, well, I guess I wouldn't necessarily call it a mistake because, well, I end up still getting through this area just fine, but what I'm about to do is far from optimal. It actually ends up being a gigantic waste of time. So I think first what I should do is try to explain what I am trying to do. And after I have successfully completed what I am trying to do, I'll explain what I really should have been doing instead. So my logic here was to try moving that block inside the cell one more time. I am trying to push that block all the way up against the side of the cell that is closest to the rift that Raziel uses to get back into the material realm. You can see me on screen doing that right now because I'm just going to over and over and over again shoot my telekinetic blast at that block until it is finally eventually pressed up all the way against that cell. And once it is all the way up against that side of the cell, I have Raziel go into the spectral realm, and I'm going to be using that block as a stepping stool to get to a higher up platform on that side of the cell. And once Raziel is on top of that platform, you can have him look around to the interior of the cell, and up there with him is going to be another platform that is seemingly just within range of him to be able to glide to, although it is kind of a tricky one to time and get just right. That is going to be the platform immediately to his right, and as you can tell, whenever I try going to it, I'm having some trouble reaching that ledge, although I'm getting pretty close. So after trying this and messing it up a few times, I began to wonder if maybe this is something I'm supposed to be doing in the material realm and not the spectral realm. Because it seemed like I was getting really close and it seemed like this jump should be possible, and yes, it definitely is, but I was just not quite making it, so I was kind of trying to evaluate what I could be doing differently. So okay, I have Raziel go into the material realm to try this a slightly different way. Once he is in the material realm, I need to move that block again. So I'm going to be doing the same thing as before, just over and over and over again, shooting those telekinetic blasts at the block until it's back on the opposite side of the cell that I think it was originally already at. So I just non-stop keep shooting at that block until finally it's all the way back over at the opposite side of the cell, which takes a moment, but once it is finally in a usable position, I can go over to that side of the cell. I can use that block to get up onto the opposite platform. And as you will recall, on that platform is going to be a rift. We used it previously when trying to get to that median area between the entry gates. That was our way of getting to that overlook of the courtyard that we glided over and managed to get into the room with the 2 pools of water. Only this time, whenever we go back into the material realm, we're not going to be doing all of that. We are just going to be going right back to the cell. That way we can move the block physically in the material world all the way back to the opposite side of the cell again, and then once it is over there, we can hop onto that block, hop back onto the platform, and try that jump one more time, or more realistically, probably a few times. So yeah, once I am back up there and I'm in the material realm, I try this jump again a few times, and it does take a little while for me to get it just right and actually successfully pull it off. But eventually it does end up happening. And once I finally do make it onto that platform, I see there is a movable block on the platform with me that I can shove into the cell, giving me 2 different blocks that I can work with. The other thing I notice on the platform is that there is another hallway that I have not gone down before, so naturally I'm going to go explore that. And once I make it all the way to the end of that hallway, I discover I completely wasted a bunch of time and a lot of effort doing what I just did. Let me explain. That hallway leads all the way back to the furnace, the same one that we just used earlier to blow a hole in the wall. It leads directly behind the lever that we pulled earlier to ignite the gas. I just never bothered to turn around and see if there was a hallway there. Whenever I saw the hole explode in the wall, I just assumed that was where I needed to go next. I was not correct about that. What I should have been doing was going back to that lever and going down that hallway, which will have taken us all the way to that platform where the block is that I could shove into the cell, and then I could start manipulating those 2 blocks with there being very little time wasted between the time I blew a hole in the wall and those blocks being made available to me to use. But instead I went the most inconvenient route I could think of, short of just being completely wrong about where I needed to go. And as you saw, I was just moving that 1 block over and over again, back and forth inside that cell, trying to make it up to a platform, trying to do a very tricky jump that was borderline possible, borderline not possible. And finally, whenever I did end up pulling it off, it turns out none of it was necessary. I just went down the wrong hallway. Like less than a 10-second walk down a hallway would have saved me all of that time. And it was once I made that realization, I actually began to wonder, should I restart the game and just reload my previous save point and start over again from there and record that instead? You know, go with the most efficient version of this playthrough that I could possibly do and save myself all this extra time. And I ultimately decided to keep the mistake in. For one, I kind of wanted to show that there was an alternative way of doing this, one I would never recommend anyone doing because it's just a gigantic waste of time, but still it is possible, so that's one reason I wanted to keep it in. But also, I kind of love getting to show these mistakes and just little things going wrong every now and then. Like, for the most part, this is a pretty clean playthrough, and I think I'm doing things pretty efficiently for the most part. But I also never intended to try doing a perfect playthrough of anything because I kind of find that a little bit boring. Some of the most entertaining moments in games that I play is whenever things just do not go according to plan. So yeah, I decided to go ahead and keep it in the game, and I hope it was not too big of a distraction, and now we can go back to efficiently trying to find and kill Dumah. Now that I am done explaining that mistake, I should probably actually explain what we are doing right now, because after figuring all of that out and getting the 2 blocks in the cell, I stacked them on top of each other, pushed them to one side of the cell that we had not gone up yet. And together those were tall enough to give us access to a platform and a hallway that we have not seen before. That hall leads all the way over to the drawbridge that was closed. And from this height, there are now a bunch of platforms on all sides of the walls surrounding where the drawbridge needs to be lowered. And using those platforms, Raziel can leapfrog between them until he eventually reaches the top, and up there is going to be a lever he can pull that will lower the bridge. Now, if you were watching all of this while I was explaining my mistake before, you've seen me screw this up a good amount. Like, I got pretty close to the top and then fell all the way back down to the bottom and had to start all over again. And gee whiz, that's actually not going to be the very last time that I fall all the way to the bottom of the pit of misery. Up here in a moment, whenever I try jumping across to either the lever or the rift, can't remember which, my finger actually ends up slipping and I screw up, and that's going to cause me to not glide, and if I don't glide, well, I fall all the way to the bottom of the pit. Which meant I would end up having to reset by going all the way back to the cell, making sure I got my bearings right, then starting this whole process of trying to climb and leapfrog all these platforms all over again. So I guess you could say the mistakes were really starting to stack up and maybe cost me a bit of time, but fortunately I feel like I don't spend too much time in here regardless, so that's not too big of a deal. But yeah, the trick here is just kind of figuring out which higher platform Raziel can reach from the lower platform he is standing on and just keeping the process going until he reaches the top. And at the very top, the thing that was throwing me off was I couldn't quite figure out how to get to one platform, and I realized I should have been using one of the platforms that is slightly broken. And using that broken portion of that platform, I can jump up to it from the platform that is below it, have Raziel pull himself up, and from that height he can pretty much reach what he needs to. So yeah, long story short and a few mistakes later, I do make it to the top, we pull that lever, and the drawbridge is down. Then we are going to be able to access the square with a gated off obelisk in the middle of it. Now that the drawbridge is down, I take a moment to look downward and make sure I'm going to be jumping into the right spot, because I really don't want to jump and miss and go all the way down into the pit again. It'd be a little bit embarrassing to do that 3 times just in this one video alone. I eventually do land successfully onto the drawbridge, and I continue down the hallway that we now have access to because it is open, which is going to lead us to the second to last puzzle of the area that we're currently in. Now earlier we saw that the obelisk in the square was gated off. But also we saw the doors to the throne room. They were also blocked off with gates that we could neither open or pass through in the spectral realm. So since we did not have a way of getting through that before, the next puzzle is going to be, well, getting those open. I have Raziel go over here, grab this block, pull it out of the wall, and then pull it a little bit to the side. And then once that is in place, I go ahead and have Raziel hop onto the block so that he can reach a platform that was hidden just above. And this is going to kick off a climbing portion of the next puzzle. So for this climbing puzzle, I have Raziel hop on these pillars, and I need him to shift between the spectral and material realms to continuously be adjusting their height. And as that cinematic kind of implies, if we climb all the way up to the top, we're going to reach a point where we should have a clear line of sight on the obelisk, and while in the physical world, we should be able to glide over the gates and land within, right next to that obelisk where we can physically manipulate it. And once we have done all of that and we are within the fence line, we want to push the obelisk over in the direction of the throne room. That's going to break through the gates containing the obelisk, but it's also going to break through the gates that are keeping us from reaching the throne. And just like that, Raziel performs a great deal of property damage, and I really hope none of this was super historical or worth preserving.
My brother, Dumah, a powerful warrior in life. He would have burned with shame to have me find him here like a stuck pig.
Humans may have impaled Dumah, but doing so does not completely destroy the body, and the soul is never too far behind. So I am shifting into the spectral realm, and let's see if we can have a conversation.
Come to save my soul, prodigal brother.
Not to save it, but to take it. Your only salvation is release.
This is a really fun detail that I did not know about until playing this remaster, that Dumah's spirit is still behind in the spectral realm nearby his body, and that if you go into the spectral realm you could have that conversation. Now there is no way for us to defeat Dumah in the spectral realm, so we're going to postpone this fight just long enough for me to get back into the material realm. So since we cannot weaken Dumah enough to devour his soul in the spectral realm, we're going to have to do it in the material world, but that's also going to require us to solve the whole Dumah is dead problem. Which fortunately, since we've already kind of done this with regular vampires, we know that we can resurrect him by removing the things that he's impaled with. So one by one we're going to remove those pikes from his body, and once they are all gone, Dumah's soul can return to his body and we can have the second part of that conversation. And if we kill him in the material world, there is going to be a brief moment before his soul returns to the spectral realm when we can devour it.
Unbound at last. I thank you, brother.
Your thanks are premature, Dumah. I have not forgotten whose hands bore me into the abyss.
The centuries in limbo have honed my strength.
Not even Kain is my equal.
Even the strongest vampire is vulnerable.
We shall test your thesis, Raziel.
My bloodthirst has been superseded by an even darker hunger. I will consume your soul before this day is done.
So the gimmick with Dumah's fight is that he is a very powerful warrior who's basically invulnerable to anything Raziel could throw at him physically. We are not going to be able to beat him in a one-on-one fight, so we're going to have to look for an alternative. Basically, like every other boss fight up to this point, there is going to be a puzzle. We have to look around the environment and find some other alternative means of killing him, which fortunately for us, we've already kind of prepped. That is going to be the furnace. But we are going to have to get Dumah from the throne room all the way back to the furnace in order to use that to kill him. What is fortunate about that is Dumah is a very persistent and aggressive enemy. So as long as we stay relatively close to Dumah, he's going to continue chasing after us. If we get too far away, he is just going to go back to the throne room. So it's going to be one gigantic game of na 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 na, you can't catch me, over and over until we eventually reach the throne room. Every now and then, Dumah does take the opportunity to slow Raziel down. One of his abilities is to punch the ground hard enough that it disorients Raziel. Then he is going to run up to Raziel and try to attack him or constrict him in some way. In fact, I believe the punch itself releases some kind of spectral energy that will constrict Raziel for a brief moment, preventing him from running away. You are going to see a lot of examples of that in this boss fight, or I guess more of a boss run, because I do a terrible job of avoiding those punches. Realistically, all you have to do is jump, and then the punch will probably miss you because you're airborne. Oh, and remember when I said that I wasn't supposed to go through the hole in the wall that was blown open? I should have gone down the hallway behind the lever? That may have left you wondering, well, if you weren't supposed to use that hole in the wall, then when are you supposed to use it? The answer is right now. We are supposed to be luring Dumah through the hole in the wall to get to the furnace. Which we are now here. I'm going to run over to the walkway. Dumah cannot jump and follow me, so I jump up there. I go over to the handle while he's stuck in the middle, and boom goes Dumah.
empowers you to wind a constricting band of spectral energy around your enemies. This energy manifests itself in both the spectral and material realms, and in the physical world, it can be employed to manipulate otherwise immovable objects.
After his body was engulfed in flames, we were able to defeat Dumah, consume his soul, and now we have his ability, which is going to be a new constriction power. Anytime we run circles around something, a band of spectral energy is going to come out and start going around it as well. This can be used in combat, but I never do so because it does not feel practical, and I also think it might be a little bugged. Where this ability is going to come into play is using that band of energy to move objects to solve puzzles. Earlier there was a weird sundial in the middle of a snowy plain, and I said the sundial was going to be the key to opening up the final area of the game. Well, the constriction ability is going to move that sundial around, and that's how we're going to open up that final dungeon. So now I'm making my way there, exiting the Fortress of Dumah. Which, speaking of Dumah, I hope all these centuries in limbo waiting to be resurrected were worth it, only to be alive for about 3 more minutes before we killed him again permanently. After becoming extra crispy, you cannot help but wonder if he would have been better off stuck in the spectral realm. And once we are done climbing this wall, the Elder God is going to chime in with something new to say.
In the furthermost canyon of Nosgoth's frozen wastes, the hushed silences embrace an ancient enigma. In the bowels of this labyrinth, your master awaits.
Alright, you heard the Elder God. Our next objective is going to be finding and facing the man who killed us. We are going after Kain. In order to reach him, we have to go down this snowy path back to the sundial, but Now that we have a new boss to find and fight, there is going to be some new advice from Ariel and the Elder God, so let's go ahead and see what they have to say.
In the bowels of an inverted clockwork, the tormentor awaits. Be wary, Raziel. Those blind with rage are by destiny ensnared.
Now we have heard everything that Ariel has to say in this game, and that is an achievement. With her out of the way, let's go ahead and see what the Elder God has to say next.
In the furthermost canyon of Nosgoth's frozen wastes, the hushed silences embrace an ancient enigma. In the bowels of this labyrinth, your master awaits.
Okay, that is interesting. The Elder God said the exact same thing to Raziel here that he said right after we defeated Dumah. Now granted, whenever we talk to the Elder God here, he is basically just reiterating the same thing he said after you beat the previous boss anyway, but up till now it has been at least a little bit different. That is also one of the reasons I added his little speaking segments here in the Underworld to the playthrough, that way we can kind of see all the things he does say. But in this case, there were no little differences, he said the exact same thing. There are no differences whatsoever, which I think makes this the only time that happens in the entire game. Which I guess means I could have just skipped this part, but I already recorded it, so I figured I may as well use the footage. And now it just kind of turns into a gee whiz moment. This is the only time in the game that the Elder God says the exact same thing, or at least I think it is. So I'm having Raziel return to the same point that we were at previously, just outside of Dumah's fortress. And okay, we are now passing the walls just outside of Dumah's fortress, and we are going to continue down this snowy path. We are going to follow it all the way to the very end, where there is going to be a sundial on the ground. Now I made a point to show the sundial earlier in the playthrough, but we could not do anything with it then. However, in the time since I did that, we have defeated Dumah and we got ourselves a new ability. Now whenever Raziel runs around certain objects, he can also start unwinding a band of spectral energy. That's going to start wrapping around the same object, and you're going to be able to turn that object after doing it enough times. The object itself is going to turn in the same direction that Raziel is running. And if we do exactly that to the sundial, it is going to have a very interesting effect on the neighboring architecture. Whenever the spectral band turns the sundial, it's going to open up some doors nearby that will take us into the Oracle's Cave, a location from the previous game Blood Omen. This is one of the very few locations from that first game that actually returns in the sequel. Like the only other ones that come to mind are the Pillars and the Praptor's Fortress. Although the Oracle of Nosgoth's Cave is a little bit different here than it was back in Blood Omen. Now there are a few parts that are going to look a little bit familiar, but most of it's going to be entirely new. So yeah, you might notice that if you did play the very first game, but even if you didn't, that's not a big deal. Like whenever I played Soul Reaver for the very first time, I had not played Blood Omen. But still, the narration here is going to clue you in on pretty much everything that you need to know. And yeah, since most of the cave is brand new anyway, you're really not missing too much. Before I get too invested in trying to solve all the puzzles here in the Oracle's Cave, that way we can reach Kain, I'm going to go ahead and activate the warp gate room, that way in case anything crazy happens we are able to easily return here. And immediately outside of the warp gate room is going to be a returning area from Blood Omen that is actually pretty distinguishable. There is going to be a room ahead that used to be the Museum of the Oracle of Nosgoth, which used to contain a bunch of artifacts from across time like some old shields from various war periods, a guillotine, just all kinds of stuff. It looks like most of those artifacts have been removed, but still that is what used to be here. And it also used to be a lot harder to get here. Back in Blood Omen, when you were playing as Kain, you'd have to go through a network of caves, a bunch of different spike pits, monsters, just all kinds of fun stuff. Here, Raziel is really not going to be dealing with any of that. Although back in Blood Omen, Kain also had the option of flying into the mountain from above using his bat form. Compare that to Raziel, who just entered the cave using the base. It is possible these two took entirely different routes. I am sure Kain would have preferred the shorter option for reaching the museum that Raziel just got to take. Anyway, Raziel left the museum by going into the spectral realm and then passing through a hole in the wall. That gave us access to a new area with 3 different rooms. There is a big room in the middle with 2 closed double doors. Then to the left and right of that larger room there are going to be 2 smaller rooms, both of which have doors that can be opened or closed depending on your movement of the blocks. And what I mean by that is in the smaller rooms there are going to be holes in the walls, and above those holes are going to be symbols. Whenever you remove a block from the wall, whatever symbol is above the hole indicates which door is going to close. On the other hand, if you put a block into a hole in the wall, whatever symbol is above it indicates which door is going to open. The objective here is to open the double doors in the middle room, which is going to require 2 blocks. One block needs to go into the hole in the wall that's below a symbol that looks like a black Z. The other one needs to go in the hole in the wall that's below a symbol that looks like a black circle. I started off in the room to the right because that's where all the blocks are going to be that we need to move. The room to the left does not have any blocks inside of it, so we're also going to need to get a block over there. To do that, in the room to the right, I removed a block from the wall that is below a symbol that looks like a blue 7. Removing that block is going to close the door to the left room. Even so, I continued to move the block into the middle room and I pushed it all the way up against the closed door. After that, I had Raziel go back to the room to the right, I entered the spectral realm, and then I passed through the bars to get to the junctioning point between the rooms. We go back into the physical realm whenever we are in that junction room because there's going to be an object in that room that Raziel can run around and use his constriction ability to move. By moving it the way that I do, I end up closing off my access to the middle room, but I also open up doors that give us access to bars that can allow Raziel to pass between the left and right rooms. And after making that change, I went back to the room to the right and I continued moving around the blocks. This time I removed the block from the hole in the wall that was below a symbol that looks like a red Z. And after removing that block, I moved it to the opposite side of the room below the symbol that looks like a blue 7. Replacing the previous block, I shoved this one into the hole, which is going to open up the door that we closed previously. And after opening the blue 7 door, I shift into the spectral realm and I pass through the bars back to the central junction room. And then I am free to go over to the left room for the very first time. Like I mentioned previously, there are no blocks in the left room, so I have to go back into the large middle room and take that block I left there previously and get it into the left room. And now that the blue 7 door is open, I can go back into that big middle room, I can get the block lifted into the left room, and I continue to maneuver that block around until eventually it is below the symbol of the red Z in the left room. I then have Raziel shove that block into place, and just like that, we are halfway done with getting these double doors open. Next, we have to have Raziel return to the room to the right, and we go back to the block that was below the symbol of the blue 7 and we pull that out. Then we need to move it to the space below the symbol of the black circle. Once we have that block shoved into place, we are going to have the spaces for the black Z and the black circle covered. And with both of those spaces occupied, that is going to open the double doors. In fact, I think that's going to open up every single door, so there really shouldn't be anything obstructing us in this area going forward. Alright, the double doors are now open and now it's time to explore a little bit more. Through here are going to be the first of many Tyrell clan vampires, and they are going to be almost the exclusive enemy of this area with the exception of the 2 Dumah vampires that were right by the entrance. And I do find that really interesting because of the explanation that they would eventually give for why Tyrell is not in this game, because they kind of end up giving a retroactive explanation later, and it makes a ton of sense whenever you factor in this location. But like I was saying earlier in the playthrough, Tyrell was supposed to be in this game, but he got cut due to a time constraint. And that would make him the only brother or fellow lieutenant of Raziel that he does not fight in this game. And I guess just leaving Tyrell alive would be a gigantic blemish on Raziel's revenge path, so eventually the creators kind of had to give an explanation for what happened to Tyrell, and then also try to find a way for Raziel to still fight him in a future game. And having the Tyrell clan vampires here in the Oracle's Cave and even further into the actual Moebius chronoplast area, that gave a pretty good explanation from a storytelling standpoint for why exactly he was not present. And I will go ahead and explain it here because I don't know if I'm ever going to do videos on Legacy of Kain Defiance, but that is the game where you get answers for what happened to Tyrell. And the explanation is that Tyrell is no longer in this time period. It turns out Tyrell was sent into the distant past before the events of Blood Omen, or possibly during the events of Blood Omen. All I know for sure is that Tyrell is in a time period that takes place prior to Kain killing off all the other Guardians. And whenever you consider that his clan is still here in this cave, it's kind of reasonable to believe that he may have been tinkering with the time-traveling equipment, possibly not even knowing what they did. And that would mean he sent himself inadvertently over a millennia into the past. And thus we have an explanation for why Tyrell is not in this game and why he is not able to be killed by Raziel. He is just not here anymore. And it would take Raziel going through the events of this game, Soul Reaver 2, and most of Legacy of Kain Defiance before he figured that out. Although since he was supposed to be a boss in this game and that boss fight is somewhat available to us courtesy of the cut content that's now available in this remaster, I may go ahead and just show what that boss fight would have kind of looked like, show you what the design of Tyrell was, and kind of theorize how we would have been able to beat him. I will save that for after the credits though, and I'll continue to focus on this playthrough for right now. Now you've been seeing me do this in the background, but after opening the double doors courtesy of that block puzzle, we were able to go up an escalating path all the way up here to where there was an obstruction. That obstruction is being a closed door. In order to get that door open, we had to use our telekinesis to knock some blocks into some spaces in the wall. And after knocking those blocks into the holes in the wall, the door finally opened. And beyond that was another puzzle that we could solve using our constriction ability on some more objects. We had 4 columns with protrusions in them, and by using the constriction ability we could turn those columns. What I did was turn all the columns to where the protrusion was pointing towards the middle of the room. Once all 4 of them were pointed towards the middle of the room, the door back in the Museum of the Oracle of Nosgoth opened up. So now I have Raziel going all the way back down to that museum room. And beyond that door is going to be the cauldron where Kain got to have his very first conversation, his first introduction to Moebius. Although Moebius at the time was disguised as the Oracle of Nosgoth. That disguise was his alter ego that would allow him to go undetected while also giving advice to people he wanted to manipulate. That included Kain, who was on a mission to kill all the other guardians of Nosgoth, and Moebius himself was secretly the Time Guardian. We are about to have a cutscene though, so after that I'll explain what those manipulations were and why he did it.
The Oracle's Cave, where Kain's first fateful meeting with Moebius occurred. Moebius played the role of a doddering soothsayer, stirring his pot of visions while dispensing enigmatic predictions to gullible visitors. Underneath the facade was Moebius the Time Streamer, sorcerer of the Circle of Nine, a ruthless manipulator with the power to bend time. Since his murder at Kain's hands centuries ago, these caves have stood vacant, though, like Moebius himself, they are rumored to be only a facade for a much larger, more elaborate complex. I sensed that Kain was here, and at that moment, I would have plumbed the depths of hell to find him.
So Moebius manipulated Kain into going after a tyrannical ruler called the Nemesis. And the solution to beating the Nemesis that Kain came up with was to go into the past and defeat him before he ever became the Nemesis. Whenever Kain did that though, the public just saw a vampire killing a young ruler with a very bright future. This is what Moebius wanted because he secretly wanted to eradicate all the vampires. And after the young ruler died, it sparked a crusade that very nearly led to their extinction. At one point in Blood Omen, Kain was actually the very last vampire.
This, I deduced, must be the man himself, the Time Streamer, Moebius. He seemed not at all the impressive figure I had imagined from Kain's boasted exploits. And yet, even this cold image radiated a certain undeniable power.
So Kain went on to kill Moebius and every other guardian with the exception of himself, which led to him refusing the sacrifice at the Pillars. After that, he repopulated the vampires in Nosgoth, and the world's now overpopulated with them, and that's kind of what we're dealing with now. And while I have not talked about it, this puzzle is really easy. You pull the lever to move the arms on the clock, and you keep doing so until it reads 6 o'clock. Once it strikes that time, there's going to be a hole that opens up in the floor, giving us access to a new area. I have Raziel jump down there, and we are going to find a light puzzle. The setup for this puzzle is that there is now a beam of light going through the hole in the floor, and it is being projected onto 3 different screens. Before the beams of light can hit those screens though, it has to go through these blocks, and each of these blocks happen to have some sort of a glass window, and those glass windows are tinted a specific color. And you will notice that whenever the light is passing through those blocks, whenever it comes out the other side, the light is also that same color. And you may notice that these screens are also a specific color. The idea here is that whenever the light passes through the windows on the blocks, whatever color the window is tinted is also going to be the same color the light is going to be whenever it passes through to the other side. The idea here is that you want to turn the block so that whenever the light is passing through, the tinted window turns the light the same color as the screen that it ends up hitting. So putting it simply, if the screen is red, we need to turn that block so that whenever the light passes through it, the light is also turned red. Or if the screen were blue, we would need to turn the block so that whenever the light passes through it, it's turned blue as well. There is one case where the screen is purple and there are 2 blocks that you have to move. In that case, you have to turn it to where the light has to pass through both the blue window and the red window, which will then combine and turn it into a purple tinted light. And if for any reason you have trouble seeing certain colors, just have Raziel turn the blocks in the exact same way that I am doing. I think they are in the exact same order every single time. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I feel like it is, so you'll probably be able to get by just doing the exact same things that I just did. Anyway, the light puzzle has been solved, and now we find ourselves in the middle of a clockwork puzzle that is going to be yet again color coordinated. To solve this one, you need to look at the circles on the wall and identify what the symbols are inside of them, and also what the color of the circle is. Then you need to look at the clockwork on the ground beneath you. And you are going to notice that every arm on the clock for the minute, the hour, the second, they are all going to be a different color. But those colors correspond with the symbols on the wall. So what you are going to need to do is move the arm on the clock that is the same color as the symbol on the wall until it is eventually lined up with that symbol. For example, Melchiah's symbol is inside the circle that is yellow, so we need to move the yellow arm of the clock until it's eventually pointed at Melchiah's symbol. Kain's symbol is inside the circle that is red, so we need to move the red arm until it's eventually pointed at Kain's symbol. And lastly, the blue arm of the clock needs to be pointed at Dumah's symbol because Dumah's symbol is inside the blue circle. And similar to what I was saying earlier, the order does not change for this puzzle either, so even though this is a color-based puzzle, there are other ways to solve it. So you can follow exactly what I just did. You can distinguish exactly which arm on the clock needs to be pointed at what symbol based on the length, and just have the exact same length of arm pointed at the same symbols that I just did, and you should be able to solve this puzzle. So yeah, even if you have trouble seeing those colors, you should still be able to solve it. After I finished having all the clock arms pointed at the appropriate symbols, the door opened, and then I moved down this hall until we eventually ran into some vampires, which I've been progressively killing off with the fire glyph. Which the fire glyph and the sunlight glyph are going to be good enough to one-shot each of these guys, only the fire glyph is a little bit less expensive, so I keep using it instead. And I know I've mentioned this a few times, but if you're curious about how to get those, I'll make sure there is a link to that video in the description. So that hallway took us to the very next puzzle, which is going to require us to move a few blocks. That way they are no longer blocking the gears, and those gears can continue to turn. And whenever those gears do start to move again, you're going to notice that in the background, all the other mechanisms are going to start moving as well. Now all the moving equipment is going to be important in basically two major ways. One way is that it causes a platform to rise, which we can use to then reach a walkway that otherwise would be out of reach. And after you reach that walkway, the second thing that we're going to notice, the second major thing that changes with all the movement of the mechanisms, is that there is going to be a pendulum-like rod with a platform on top of it. And from the walkway we can reach that platform whenever it swings in our direction. Then we just need to ride that to the very top of its rotation, and we are going to find another hallway to the very next puzzle. In my first playthrough of this remaster, this is about as far as I got before the glitching prevented me from reaching the end of the game, because my actions with this next block puzzle in combination with the glitch led to me being unable to progress. That being said, let me explain what this puzzle was supposed to be. We have a spiral walkway descending to a bottom floor. At the bottom floor we are going to see two blocks, each has symbols on them. When you look at the floor there is going to be a square with a picture on it. Comparing the symbols on the blocks, you will see the symbols are actually small parts of the picture on the floor. We need 4 blocks arranged correctly to replicate that picture. But we need 2 more blocks to fill in that picture. If we go back up the walkway, we will find additional blocks on platforms, but there are bars preventing us from physically moving them. Instead, we need to use our telekinesis to push them off the platforms, and they will fall to the bottom where the picture is on the floor. Once you knock those off and all 4 of them are on the bottom floor, you can finish the puzzle. And once you arrange those on top of the picture in a way that exactly matches the picture, the door will open. So with all of that being said, what caused my first playthrough attempt to go wrong? Well, the physics of the game did not do what they were supposed to do. All throughout this playthrough, you have seen me stack blocks on top of each other. And whenever it comes to the 2 blocks that were on those platforms that I needed to knock off with the telekinesis, whenever they fell to the bottom floor, if they landed on top of a block, they should have stayed on top of the other block, just like they have the entire game. But in this case, they did not do that. The physics failed, and what happened was the block I knocked off fell through the block that was already on the bottom floor. And as a result, we had 2 blocks occupying the same space as each other. And there was nothing I could do to separate those blocks. In fact, because of that glitch, Raziel could not even put his claws in them to move the combined blocks. And if I were to move around those blocks, I could see the picture on top of them glitching to where it starts off as one but changes to another and would eventually change back. That's how I knew that they were inside of each other. So yeah, they just became immovable and inseparable objects. And as a result, I could not reconfigure them in a way that could complete the picture because I needed all 4 blocks. And well, I technically had less than that because 2 of them were combined. Then I did a very foolish thing without thinking about it too hard. I saved the game and I restarted the game because I thought, well, maybe the game will reload and they'll separate and I'll be able to complete this puzzle. That was a mistake though, because whenever I saved the game, it locked those blocks together for, well, basically forever. There was no way for me to roll back that save, so I had basically soft locked myself to where I could not possibly solve this puzzle, and without solving this puzzle, I could not beat the game. So I had to start the game all over again because of that. But one thing I am going to do is show you exactly what I'm talking about because I happen to still have that save available. So I'm going to load up that save file so you can see it for yourself. Just let me go ahead and knock out this puzzle that I'm completing right now, that way it's going to be done whenever I come back to this footage after I show you the save footage of me soft locking myself, or the aftermath of that. And while I'm completing the puzzle, I should say that one of the more interesting things about whenever I reloaded the game after saving it in the soft locked file was that the combined blocks were no longer combined once I did reload the game, but the game didn't correct itself. Instead, I just had less blocks to work with, and I could not possibly complete the puzzle because I did not have 4 of them remaining anymore. So just a weird example of the game actually doing something to try and correct itself, but actually kind of making it worse. Okay, I solved the puzzle and the door is open, so we're transitioning over to the soft locked footage, and we'll return to the point when that door opened once I am done showing you this. So here in the soft locked footage, I'm trying to make my way back to that room with the block puzzle now. And while I'm making it back to that area, like I've already said, not all 4 blocks are going to be there anymore because of the weird glitch that happened on top of the existing glitch once I saved the game and reloaded it. But that's not the only thing weird happening here. And you can kind of see some of that happening now whenever I'm trying to make my way back to that room. Just like, for example, this pendulum platform that we used to get to that hallway. Yeah, there's no longer a platform on the pendulum. So in this save, I was basically just stuck with a stick that was still moving like a pendulum but with no platform on it. And to get around that and still reach the puzzle room, I would have to shift into the spectral realm and wait for the stick to stop in the upright position. That way Raziel can still jump on what little of it is left and use that as a very tiny platform for him to still jump into the hallway. So yeah, after that glitch and me saving and reloading, it kind of felt like the game was just kind of falling apart on me. Just another example of things going wrong and forcing me to start the game over again, which really sucks in this case because this was basically the second to last puzzle before the end of the game. So I soft locked myself at basically the very last possible moments, and this is also kind of why whenever I was solving the puzzle previously in the playthrough that you've been watching this entire time, I made sure to go to the bottom first and move the blocks that were down there on that bottom floor out of the way. That way whenever I went up to the platforms and knocked those blocks off, there was no possibility of them landing on top of the bottom blocks and possibly going through them again and glitching in the exact same way. Because as much as I love this game, I really did not want to have to play through it for a 4th time. I was tired of the glitches forcing me to start over. But in the soft lock playthrough, as I'm making my way back to the puzzle, I'll make sure to stop and look at these platforms to show you there are no blocks left on them. There are none left for me to knock down to the bottom floor to help solve that puzzle. What's at the bottom is all I have to work with, and it's not going to be enough. And yeah, once I do go all the way down to the bottom floor, we are only going to see 2 blocks. I even had Raziel shift back into the material world just in case this glitch was just visual, like maybe there are some invisible blocks around here that I can move. And I run around, I look for them, there's nothing. I also hope that maybe by going into the material realm, they'll just load back into the game and fall into place somewhere. That does not happen either. And yeah, besides the Tyrell clan vampire, there was just nothing else down here, it's just those 2 blocks. And with those other 2 blocks not being up on the platforms, there's really nothing I can do. I could not think of anything that could possibly create a situation where they respawned. So yeah, this is what it looked like. I was completely stuck, I could not solve the puzzle, and I was forced to start over. But yeah, I really just wanted to make sure that I showed this because it was a pretty unique scenario. It is not very often that my progress just gets completely halted like this, and so I just wanted to show everybody exactly what that was like in this case. So yeah, let's go ahead and get back to the actual playthrough that I'm doing for this video, that way we can see it all the way through to its completion. We are back on that playthrough footage now, we can finally go through those doors and continue on to the end of the game. And what was waiting beyond that door was a big hole in the floor that I have Raziel jump all the way down to the bottom of. At the bottom is going to be another hallway where I have Raziel stop for a moment and take a look at the symbols on the wall. After making note of the symbols on the wall, I continue on to the very next puzzle room where there are going to be 2 Tyrell clan vampires, both of which I kill using the fire glyph. And with both of those vampires now extra crispy, I take a look at what the actual puzzle is going to be. there is going to be an object on the ground that kind of looks like a dial, and we can move that around using the constriction ability. That dial is going to have a symbol in the middle of it, and using the constriction ability, whenever we move it, it's basically going to be pointed at one of 3 symbols on the ground. We want to rotate it so that whenever combined, the symbol on the dial and the symbol on the floor matches one of the 3 symbols that we saw on the wall in the hallway. And we are going to continue with all 3 dials until eventually we have all 3 symbols that we saw in that hallway. And I do take my time taking a look at these symbols on the dials and on the floors, that way I can eventually get all of those lined up properly so it all matches as needed. And once we have all 3 of those in the proper order, there are going to be some platforms that are made available to Raziel, and the machinery that's controlling those platforms is going to be moving them upward and downward. I have Raziel hop onto those platforms, and whenever we rotate to the very top of the rotation, we are going to see that there are some holes in the wall that we can jump into. And inside each of those is going to be a handle that we need to flip. And once we flip all 3 of those handles, it's going to open up a secret passageway that's going to take us to the very last events of the game. Really, this is the very last puzzle. And yeah, as I'm watching this, I am painfully reminded just how close I really was to the end of the game before it just got completely glitched and screwed up and soft-locked, and I had to play through this thing again. Just absolutely traumatizing at the time. I swear I am over it now, but it really sucked trying to get this footage and all this stuff was going wrong at the time. Like after this puzzle, we have like 4 or 5 cutscenes and just the final boss of the game, and that is it. Like after the 4 or 5 cutscenes, you have a warp gate room that's between you and the final boss if you want to interact with that, but really that is it. You get the cutscene for the boss battle happens, and then there's the final cutscene of the game, the big conclusion. Okay, the door is open, time to make our way to the big finale, and we are going to be passing by what is called the Chronoplast. Those are going to give Raziel visions of the past, the present, and the future. And it is really interesting watching these after having completed the series with Legacy of Kain Defiance, and there hasn't been a new entry in like 20 years, so going all the way back to this game, we get glimpses of where the creators really thought the series was going to go. And I will be more than happy to give my interpretation of what those scenes ended up becoming. Like in what ways did the visions change between this game and the future games? But first, let's go ahead and take a look at the past.
My arrival in this miserable age. What trickery is this?
It is no illusion, Raziel, but a glimpse into the currents of time itself.
Alright, we start off by seeing the wonderful moment when Raziel wakes up in the Underworld and this revenge story really kicked off. But he is not done looking into the events of the past just yet. Let's take a look at another.
These apparitions torment me. Has this all been foretold?
Alright, and second was whenever the fight with Kain the first time around ended and the Soul Reaver was broken upon Raziel rather than killing him. An event that becomes increasingly important as the series goes on, because that becomes a very key plot point that the entire franchise starts to revolve around. You get to see that a lot in Soul Reaver 2.
Impossible! This must be one of Kain's deceptions.
And in the third vision, we get to see the moment when Raziel figured out that in his past life before becoming a vampire, he was a Sarafan warrior priest who was part of the effort to try and exterminate the vampires, making his entire new existence that was orchestrated by Kain one gigantic sick joke. That is a major plot point in Soul Reaver 2 as well.
mind reels with conflict. Does Kain await me moments from now, or in some century yet to come?
I believe that cutscene was a scrap from the leftover cut content that was originally going to be part of this game, and it's now being framed as a future event. Considering Kain does not have the Soul Reaver in that moment, I don't think it's whenever Raziel and Kain eventually fight at Avernus Cathedral, which was my original guess. So I guess that's whenever Raziel confronts him at the Sarafan stronghold in the second game. Well, the second Soul Reaver game. But originally I think that scene was supposed to be at Kain's mountain retreat in this game.
This cannot be. What madness does this scene portend? Kain must think me credulous to suffer these lies.
Now that scene definitely does come to be in a future game. In fact, it's one of the very last moments of the entire series. Although whenever it did actually get acted out towards the end of Legacy of Kain Defiance, it was way less violent than that cutscene would have you believe. Ariel quite willingly gives up her spirit to Raziel's Soul Reaver to purify it, and he reluctantly does so, as it is one of the only ways to overcome what is either truly the greatest threat or one of the greatest threats in the entire franchise.
Is this phantasm a conjuration of my mind, or an echo of future events?
There is not a lot to go on in that cutscene, but just if I had to guess, Raziel standing in a long corridor, he has a red Reaver that kind of looks like the Fire Reaver, but a little bit different. I'm assuming that was repurposed to be the moment that he saw Janos Uldren getting killed in Soul Reaver 2. It's kind of a similar background. I mean, that would kind of make sense because that's when he first gets the Fire Reaver in that game. Like I said, it looks a lot different than the Fire Reaver in this game, but that's my best guess. I mean, there are not exactly a bunch of red Soul Reavers in this franchise, so that's my best guess. It's maybe just a different variant of the Fire Reaver. Although if anyone watching this knows exactly what that scene was supposed to be, please let me know. But before the very last boss fight of the game, I am going to activate this warp gate. Just in case for any reason I have to reload the game, I have a fast way of getting back to this point without doing all those puzzles again. After discussing to a good degree the amount of glitches I have experienced in previous playthroughs, even if I have not experienced them in this playthrough, I would rather be safe and have a fast way of getting back here. I'm definitely not going to just ignore how those previous playthroughs went, all because I've been lucky so far. So yeah, we are playing it safe, no going back through all those puzzles again. We can just go ahead and fast travel here as needed. Fingers crossed, we do not have to experience anything further to delay our progress in beating this game. Let's go ahead and exit the warp gate room and make our way to face off against the final boss of the game. And I am now fully healed and ready for a fight, so let's go ahead and say hello to Kain.
I must say I'm disappointed in your progress. I imagined you'd be here sooner. Tell me, did it trouble you to murder your brothers?
Did it trouble you when you ordered me into the abyss?
No. I had faith in you. In your ability to hate. In your self-righteous indignation.
Lies. You cannot have foreseen all of this.
Eternity is relentless, Raziel. When I first stole into this chamber centuries ago, I did not fathom the true power of knowledge. To know the future, Raziel. To see its paths and streams tracing out into the infinite. As a man, I could never have contained such forbidden truths. But each of us is so much more than we once were. Gazing out across the plains of possibility, do you not feel with all your soul how we have become like gods? And as such, are we not indivisible? As long as a single one of us stands, we are legion. That is why, when I must sacrifice my children to the void, I can do so with a clear heart.
Very poetic, Kain. But in the end, you offer no more than a convenient rationalization for your crimes.
These chambers offer insight for those patient enough to look. In your haste to find me, perhaps you have not gazed deeply enough. Our futures are predestined. Moebius foretold mine a millennium ago. We each play out the parts fate has written for us. We are compelled ineluctably down preordained paths. Free will is an illusion.
I have been to the tomb of Sarafan, Kain. Your dirty secret is exposed. How could you transform a Sarafan priest into a vampire?
How could I not? One must keep his friends close, Raziel, and his enemies even closer. Can you grasp the absurd beauty of the paradox? We're the same. Sarafan and vampire. With our holy wars, our obsession with Nosgoth's domination, who better to serve me than those whose passion transcends all notions of good and evil?
I will not applaud your clever blasphemy. The Sarafan were saviors, defending Nosgoth from the corruption that we represent. My eyes are opened, Kain. I find no nobility in the unlife you rudely forced on my unwilling corpse.
You may have uncovered your past, but you know nothing of it. You think the Sarafan were noble, altruistic? Don't be simple. Their agenda was the same as ours.
You are lost in a maze of moral relativism, Kain. These apparitions and portents. What game are you playing now?
Destiny is a game, is it not? And now, you await my latest move.
That was the first time I had listened to that cutscene in about 20 years, and I have to say the dialogue in it is still fantastic. Now, a lot of that dialogue gets reused in the opening cutscene for Soul Reaver 2, although that cutscene is a little bit shorter than what we just watched. So there was a little bit removed here and there, so the dialogue is not exactly the same. And I would say if you've only ever heard the Soul Reaver 2 version rather than the full unedited version of this game, then I would recommend going back to the beginning of that cutscene and comparing the two. And I only recommend that because I thought it was really fun picking out all the little differences between this cutscene and the one in the opening cutscene of Soul Reaver 2. Overall, I like the dialogue in this one much more, but I also like what they did for Soul Reaver 2 as well. The main thing where I think Soul Reaver 2 is a little bit better is that they allow the characters to move and interact and even fight a little bit. Whereas here in Soul Reaver 1, they are basically just standing still talking to each other for a prolonged period of time. It's not quite as exciting even if the dialogue is better. Anyway, enough talking about the dialogue of the cutscene, we have a boss battle taking place. And it is going to be very similar to when Raziel fought Kain for the very first time back at the Pillars. Kain is just going to teleport around the arena and charge up his bolt spell, which he is going to cast at Raziel if Raziel is too slow getting to him. So Raziel has to make it all the way to Kain before that spell gets cast, and he has to strike him. If Raziel is able to strike Kain before the bolt spell goes off, Kain is going to teleport away, adjust one of the dials in this room, and then teleport to the very next level of this arena. There are going to be 3 different levels, 3 different stories. He starts off at the very bottom of the pit with Raziel, then he teleports to the 2nd level, and then he is going to teleport to the 3rd and final level. So Raziel is going to have to work a little bit harder to get to Kain in this arena as opposed to at the Pillars, which was all just 1 level. Although, if you do take all the time necessary to find all the health artifacts and expand your life as far as it will go, there's really nothing Kain can do to kill Raziel unless you're just really screwing up. He's not going to be able to one-shot Raziel like he could back at the Pillars, so Raziel can take 1 or 2 hits from the spell. On top of that, there is going to be this little emblem at the very bottom of the pit that can heal you all the way back to full health. So if you ever just need a moment to reorient yourself and kind of come up with your game plan, just stand in the healing circle, and there's nothing Kain can do to kill Raziel while he is there. So yeah, Kain is technically going to be harder to beat in this fight than he was back at the Pillars, but depending on your actions throughout the playthrough, Raziel is also going to be much harder to kill for Kain. And yeah, this was my first time fighting version 2 of Kain in about 20 years, so I was very rusty whenever it came to this fight. Now when it came to every other boss in the game, I at least had the courtesy of being able to fight them one time prior to my progress being completely stopped by the soft lock. So I had a little bit of practice before I had to fight them again for this playthrough. But since that glitch happened just before this final boss fight, I had no practice for version 2 of Kain. So what you're seeing here is my very first attempt trying to fight him just in general in about 20 years, and I was trying to figure it out as I went along in the fight.
But this is not where or how it ends. Fate promises more twists before this drama unfolds completely.
Be warned, Raziel. Once you cross this threshold, you are beyond my influence.
Raziel, Redeemer and Destroyer, Pawn and Messiah, welcome, time-span soul. Welcome to your destiny. Where time is but a loop, a loose stitch in the universal cloth, a streamer might seize upon a chance, a fatal slip, and plunge the fate of planets into chaos.
So after very inefficiently chasing Kain all around the arena and struggling to get that final hit on him on the 3rd level, finally, eventually, I was able to strike him for the win, defeating the final boss of the game. And our reward for all of that effort was the cutscene we just saw and the big to be continued text to conclude everything. And to be continued is the very anticlimactic way this great game comes to an end. I would say that is really the only downside to this game, because even for its time, that ending was just super unsatisfactory, anticlimactic, whatever word you want to use. It just did not feel like a good ending, and it left you wanting more. Fortunately, more is what we would eventually get. First we got Blood Omen, then we got this game, Soul Reaver. After Soul Reaver, we got Soul Reaver 2, Blood Omen 2, and eventually Legacy of Kain Defiance. I would like to have seen even more than that, but we at least got 3 more games after this. And yeah, when it comes to Soul Reaver 2, it picks up exactly where this game leaves off. That cutscene right there, Soul Reaver 2 kind of reiterates all the main points from that cutscene and reuses a lot of it in its opening cutscene. So you are literally starting off in Soul Reaver 2 from the exact moment that you ended Soul Reaver 1. So that is kind of nice. And because the remaster for Soul Reaver included Soul Reavers 1 and 2, I am going to have the opportunity of also playing the sequel game for my Thor's Entertainment channel, which I am definitely going to do. I've already recorded all the gameplay, I just have to go through, voice it all over, and put it all together. And with that in mind, does it do a good job of picking up from this anticlimactic ending and adding to the story in a meaningful way? I would say yes, absolutely. The only real downside to Soul Reaver 2 is that's basically all it does for me. It tells a good continuation of this story. Everything else about Soul Reaver 2, with the exception of the graphics, was a bit of a downgrade for me actually. I'm going to go into way more detail on that once I am playing through the game, but just to give you a little bit of a summary without too much context, there are no real boss battles until like the very end of the game, and it is a little bit difficult for me to call those boss battles. I will get into why exactly I feel that way whenever I'm covering those battles. There are also way less optional items in Soul Reaver 2. In fact, I don't even know if there are any now that I'm really thinking about it. Like here in Soul Reaver 1, you had the glyphs, you had the health emblems, and you had the mana artifacts. These are all things that you could find all throughout Nosgoth, and usually it required you to backtrack to other areas of the game after you had advanced your character enough to get some new abilities. So you're returning to spots in the very beginning of the game that you otherwise would have no reason to visit, but now that you have some new powers, you could open up entirely new places to explore. And within those new explorable areas, you could find these beneficial optional items. They were just little rewards that could make your playthrough a little bit easier if you were willing to just check out what the developers had created, truly exploring and experience all Nosgoth had to offer whenever you had the abilities to continue to explore areas to a greater extent. Soul Reaver 2 has none of that. It is a very linear story. So no bosses, no real reason to explore the environment. You're kind of on rails from start to finish. And while I have not tallied up exactly how much time takes place in this game for actual gameplay, I think if you were to add up all the time it takes to watch the cutscenes in Soul Reaver 2, they may actually be longer than the amount of time it takes to beat Soul Reaver 2 just from the gameplay perspective whenever you're controlling Raziel. So if you're playing Soul Reaver 2, it's kind of just to watch those cutscenes if I'm being completely honest for you. Now, if it sounds like I'm ragging on Soul Reaver 2, I mean, I guess I kind of am to an extent. I still think it's a fun game, and I like the Legacy of Kain story so much to where I don't really feel like it matters. It's worth playing just for that alone. So with that being said, feel free to check out the Soul Reaver 2 playthrough once I put it out. Even if it is a little bit of a downgrade compared to Soul Reaver 1, I think the story is still good enough to where I would recommend somebody check it out. But I may be looking ahead just a little bit too much. What are my feelings on Soul Reaver 1? So I mentioned earlier that Soul Reaver 1 was a game that I grew up on, and it was one of my absolute favorites. The story was the main reason for that. In fact, this was one of the very first games that made me realize that video games could be used to tell a very grand story that gets you invested because you are controlling the main character. It is not a passive way of experiencing a story. You are very actively engaged in it. And that really made me realize what I wanted from games growing up. That's one of the reasons I went on to love this series going forward, because they managed to maintain a high quality of storytelling. It's one of the reasons I really got into Final Fantasy after a while. Just anything with a very elaborate and well thought out plot immediately would appeal to me when it came to video games. And I kind of have Soul Reaver to thank for that because it was really one of the first times I had experienced it. And with all that praise, how do I feel about it now that I have played the game again for the first time in about 20 years? Well, whenever I was playing through it, I found my feelings really did not diminish very much. I still think it's a very well told game. I think the voice acting is still quite solid considering when it came out. And even playing through it, even though gameplay has definitely advanced far beyond this since, the 90s, I still think it was a very good time playing it. Granted, some things are a little bit clunky by today's standards, but still, I enjoyed it. Getting to re-experience the puzzles after all this time and relearn them, some of them are a little bit much, like there are way too many block puzzles in this game, especially in the Silenced Cathedral, but I did like having to think everything through and kind of problem solve my way through the story. I still basically remembered how to beat all the bosses, but I was reminded of what it was like to fight against them for the very first time and how like every single boss is basically a puzzle by itself. Raziel's not really overpowering anyone in this game with the exception of maybe Kain. And even then, that's somewhat of a challenge too, because Kain can basically one-shot you with the exception of the final boss battle. So there was still a level of execution and prediction necessary for those battles to work out, and every other one, the enemies are technically much stronger than you, so you have to be pretty clever about how you beat them, and I like that detail. It is definitely not just stabbing something or shooting something a million times until it eventually dies. And I can appreciate that the creators of this game made you think about how to solve the problems in the battles you were facing. So yeah, this is kind of my long-winded way of saying that Soul Reaver 1 was very fun to revisit, and I am very thankful for this remaster. To this day, this remains one of my favorite games. So much so that I have now voiced this over 2 separate times. Once when I released this whole series of videos into separate episodes, And now once more as I am releasing the entire playthrough in one complete video. I did that because I was not really satisfied with how the separate episodes of the playthrough turned out. I thought the audio quality was not very good, and that bothered me for a game that I loved this much. And there were some things with the video as well that just wasn't very good either, just some little glitchiness, kind of like skipping frames and stuff like that. So I had a lot of incentive to come back and do this again in a way that was much better, honoring a game that means a lot to me. Before I wrap this up though, I do want to show one final thing that's really interesting about this remaster. Besides the main two games being remastered, they also released a bunch of cut content related to Soul Reaver 1, stuff that did not make it into the game that was originally planned to be part of it. I would like to take a moment to look at those with you. I'm mostly going to be focusing on the cut content related to the lost levels, and there are a few different ones, so I'm going to cover some of those here. The first of those lost levels referenced here is going to be the Undercity. And as far as I can tell, this was going to be connected to the Human Citadel, and was going to feature a boss character referred to as the Vampire Priestess or just the Priestess, as she was going to be part of a cult of humans who worshipped vampires. Raziel would have had to have infiltrated this Undercity and made his way to the boss battle against the Priestess, who upon victory would be granting Raziel the ability to either control the minds of humans or possess them. Or it might just be lesser enemies in general because it might also apply to vampires. I'm not 100% sure. And fortunately for us with this cut content, we get to see what the Priestess would have looked like. And we also get to see what her boss arena kind of also would have been like. Although it is going to be missing a bunch of functionality. Like for example, we just saw a placeholder for a cutscene, but nothing really happened. With the Priestess able to control vampire minds, I'm guessing we would have fought a few vampires here. And if you climb up the wall, you actually get to see the Priestess. Other than her model being here, she really doesn't try to attack you or do anything. So it is kind of hard to say what exactly she would have done in a fight against Raziel. But if you strike her once, she dies, and then you have the option of consuming her soul. Like I mentioned earlier, defeating her would have given Raziel the ability to control some vampire or human minds. And I think finishing that fight would have sent Raziel in the direction of the smokestack in the Tyrell territory. The smokestack could actually be seen in the opening cutscene for the entire game, or at least it used to be able to. I realized whenever playing through this playthrough that the cutscene kind of omits it from the background, but that is just the one that they redid for this game anyway. Back in the original, you could see the smokestack in the background of that cutscene. In fact, I'll go ahead and try to find an image of that for you and insert it here. I guess the remaster has it in the background as well, but it's a bit more zoomed in and it's kind of hard to see what exactly it is. But yeah, whether it is the remaster or the original, the smokestack is back there, but it is an area that we never got to explore in the game because it was cut. That is, we did not get to explore it until now. Here in the cut content, it is now available, to include the boss battle with Tyrell that would have taken place there. So the whole point of the smokestack was that it was creating smoke that would block out the sun so vampires could move around more freely. Raziel would have gone there probably to disrupt that, and then kill off a bunch of the fledgling vampires. And in the process of trying to end all the smoke production, he probably would have encountered Tyrell who would have tried to prevent him from doing so. And yeah, that would have given Raziel the opportunity to kill off the one brother that evaded him throughout this entire game. And we get to see exactly what that arena and that dialogue with Tyrell would have been like. So I'm going to go ahead and load that up now so we can kind of explore that.
Let me pass, Tyrell. I have enough blood on my hands today. My quarrel lies with Kain.
Poor Raziel. Your rage blinds you to the bond of gratitude that we owe our master.
Gratitude? Toward one who would have you grovel at his gate like a dog? You once had noble aspirations, Tyrell. Now, how humbled are your goals. Do you prosper on the scraps he casts you?
Your insults will do nothing to blunt the agonies of your demise.
You killed me once. Behold the result. I have no more to fear from you.
Now that cutscene is definitely not complete considering Terrell does not make a single bit of noise as he is walking into the arena, and his walking animation does feel especially stiff. Even so, it is really cool just to see what he would have looked like in this game. And even though Terrell was completely silent when entering the arena, we at least got that cutscene seeing Raziel and Terrell have a conversation. That conversation was just somewhat the same one that we saw Raziel have with the Tomb Guardian back at the Tomb of the Sarafan. That leads me to believe that this dialogue was eventually just recycled for the Tomb Guardian whenever Terrell was cut from the game. Now, to my surprise, the fight with Terrell is somewhat functional. Terrell will pursue Raziel wherever he goes in the arena. If you are far enough away, Terrell will throw projectiles at you, but if you're up close, Terrell will follow you, but he really does not do any sort of attacks against you, so whatever was supposed to happen up close clearly is not present here in the not final form, but the reconstructed form of this fight that we get here. And if you strike Terrell, he will laugh at you. I try to do the execution animation with the Soul Reaver a few times just to see if that would do anything different to him. It really doesn't. If I had to guess how this fight was going to go, these pillars at the very bottom of the arena seem a little bit different than everything else here, and I mean that in the sense that it kind of looks like these were supposed to be manipulatable in some way. So I think the idea was to have Terrell destroy the pillars here at the bottom of the arena, and with those out of the way, the ceiling would either collapse on him or something of that nature. Maybe the molten metal from the smokestack would come down here, maybe even water would flood the room. Because at this point, Raziel would be immune to water, I think. I'm assuming the fight with Rahab would have already happened. And also, water makes a ton of sense considering how all the other bosses were killed. We already crushed one enemy to death, that was Melchiah. We used fire to burn Zephon to death. Sunlight was used to burn Rahab to death. And then fire was again used to kill Dumah. So of all the main weaknesses vampires have in this game, basically the only one that we did not use against a boss was water, so I'm guessing water was supposed to be the way that we defeated Terrell. And as I'm looking at the ceiling, there does seem to be a pipe up there which kind of adds some weight to the theory that water was supposed to be the way of defeating Terrell. So my final theory is you're supposed to destroy the pillars, that breaks the pipe, and then water floods the arena, killing Terrell. That now makes two bosses that were cut from Soul Reaver 1, one being the Priestess, who would never return ever again anywhere else in the franchise, and then there is Terrell, who would eventually return in the franchise in the very last installment, Legacy of Kain Defiance. He ends up being a boss in that game and fights against Raziel, which is very appropriate, giving Raziel the opportunity to kill the very last of his vampire lieutenant brothers. And with all the time-traveling shenanigans that eventually come up in this franchise, it's not too surprising that he ends up in that game somewhere eventually. I won't get into exactly where and how, but he is there, and eventually I'm probably going to play Legacy of Kain Defiance since it also got a remaster recently. Although I will comment that his look in Defiance is very similar to what is in Soul Reaver 1, so they mostly stayed true to the idea that they had for him, with the exception that in that game, he ends up being a quadruped, whereas the design for him in Soul Reaver 1 was for him to be bipedal. But enough about Terrell, I have one last lost level I want to go over, and that is going to be Kain's Retreat. The description says that this was an area that was going to become available to Raziel immediately after defeating Terrell, and after leaving the smokestack. This is where the final battle against Kain was going to take place, and despite how the game now ends in its current state, this was actually going to be where Raziel killed Kain. So this is probably the biggest change between what we eventually got in the final product of Soul Reaver and what was originally planned, because Kain ends up surviving. In fact, he ends up sticking around for the entirety of the franchise. So the idea that he was going to be killed here in Soul Reaver, probably permanently or at least for a long period of time, yeah, that's a pretty big change. Now, there are no leftover parts of the boss fight that was going to take place with Kain in this lost content, but I feel like that boss battle was going to take place in the throne room. Although that is kind of hard to say. Still, that feels like an especially well-designed room, and it just kind of has final battle written all over it. It just feels like it should have big significance. And although I do feel like the throne room is the location where the final battle was going to take place, I do want to point out one other location in this retreat, because we have kind of seen it before. It's going to be this little courtyard right here. Pay attention to the stairs in the background and the symbol on the ground. And recall at the very end of the playthrough that I just did, in the Chronoplast area, we got to see a scene where Raziel was confronting Kain. And it was in this exact location. Now mind you, we never end up visiting this location in the final product of the game, but this is where it would have been. So rather than getting rid of that scene entirely, they recycled it. Used it as part of the Chronoplast to foreshadow some sort of a confrontation with Kain in the future. And I kind of had to guess what this would eventually be because we never end up in this retreat. At no point in the franchise do we ever revisit this location. This confrontation in the way that it was intended never happens. Granted, other confrontations somewhat similar to this do eventually happen. We have one that's very defining in the franchise where Raziel confronts him within the Sarafan stronghold. We have another where they actually fight each other in Avernus Cathedral. But this location and this exact kind of confrontation, yeah, it never really happens like this. So at best, you can maybe say that possibly this is at the Sarafan stronghold in the future game of Soul Reaver 2, but even that looks much different. I mean, cool for them to recycle something like this, but yeah, it's kind of funny that the Chronoplast foreshadowed something in a location that just never happens in any way whatsoever. Still, similar confrontations do end up happening, so it's not a complete loss. We can just say that the future got reimagined. Now, the very last thing that I want to show from this cut content is going to be the bridge to nowhere. Which, on that note, this area is pretty well designed and must have been pretty far into production before it got cut. And the original plan was after defeating Kain, there's going to be this bridge available to Raziel that he could take all the way back to the Silenced Cathedral. From there, he would be able to use the organ and play the hymn all across Nosgoth that is able to kill the vampires and would have exterminated them. Now that was cut, so that also does not happen in the main game. And that bridge also does not exist, but I can kind of see where it probably was going to be within this little retreat for Kain. We'll go ahead and go up there now, but it's basically going to be this staircase that leads all the way to the top of the retreat, where there's going to be a big opening, where it seems like there should have been a bridge that went there, but instead there was just a big opening to nowhere. So I'm over here theorizing about how things would have originally ended in Soul Reaver 1 if everything had gone down the exact same way. And keep in mind, Kain is dead. Basically, all the vampires are dead at the very end of Soul Reaver 1. I feel like in some way, Raziel is still going to figure out that he was being manipulated by the Elder God to kill off all the vampires. And even though his revenge would 100% be justified against Kain and his brothers, there would be this moment of clarity that maybe he was manipulated to take it even further than perhaps he should have. And that the extinction of the vampires would have had more dire consequences than he originally realized when he was on his revenge path. And if that revelation came out and the Elder God was revealed to be the real villain, Raziel would probably try to find some way of undoing what he did, defeating the Elder God and maybe undoing the greater ramifications of his actions. And I think that might have led to him evaluating time travel as a solution. And that could potentially have him sent into the past and giving him a similar plot to what unravels in Soul Reaver 2 anyway. So I don't think the original ending for Soul Reaver 1 is that far removed from what we actually got, just without Kain dying. Whether or not the rest of the vampires lived in this future, well, it really does not matter whenever you look at the outcome of the rest of the series. So yeah, that is my theory, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this cut content by having Raziel sitting on Kain's throne, and I'll go ahead and start the outro here. And for anyone who has gotten this far, thank you for checking out this very long video, this full playthrough of Soul Reaver. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, feel free to check out the other stuff I have on the Thor's Entertainment channel. Certainly have a wide variety of things on there at this point for other games. There are a lot of little Mortal Kombat 1 videos up on there right now. I have playthroughs of other games too, like the remakes of Resident Evils 1, 2, and 3. I think most recently I had a playthrough of Endling Extinction is Forever, a very good game, although one that's going to punch you in the heart a few times along the way. So yeah, if any of that sounds interesting to you, feel free to check it out. Regardless of what you do though, just thank you for watching this video for this long. Take care. Hopefully I will see you in the next one, which is going to be a playthrough of this game's sequel, Soul Reaver 2.